Chapter 1. He sat on his cosmic throne with a frown, staring at a gaseous screen in disapproval. He sighed, straightened his back and waved the screen away with a flick of the hand, the small cloud instantly dissipating into smaller clouds of gas. So another one of those weaklings have died. It's to be expected, though, as they're not like me. They're not the true Issei Hyodo. Issei slid out of his throne and descended a set of stairs as they formed under his feet, wandering around the strange dimension that was his home. Even if he had been living for a millennia, he could never understand the dimension he was in. It was gaseous, that much was obvious, but that was all he knew. Issei couldn't even deconstruct the gas that would follow his every command, both conscious and subconscious, because a strange force wouldn't allow him to do so. Even if he commanded the gas to reveal its secrets in a worded form, it would not do so, and it frustrated the omnipotent being to no end. The only thing he could do in this dimension was continuously gain an infinite amount of knowledge or watch the struggles of various Isseis, all of which ended in boredom and some kind of death. The Issei that the true Issei had just seen was an overly perverted human who had become a devil easier than the others had. The devil group seemed to be a common denominator in all of the lives he observes, and it's almost always because of a strange power that the boy would inherit upon his birth, the only thing that made him special and worth watching. The true Issei knew it was the mythical boosted gear because he had experienced its nostalgic power in a time that has long passed. He did not have that power anymore, though, as he had once died and had lost the privilege to hold that power. Now, what shall I do? I believe I have run out of things to do in this realm. That was almost true. The only thing the true Issei hasn't experienced was the power of a strange black hole in a corner of his dimension. It was dangerous to an ordinary human and any normal matter, but the gas that formed this dimension and Issei himself were not normal in any way. In fact, Issei thought he was very strange and mystical, so much so that he couldn't remember a single human word that could describe him. That fleeting thought entertained him for a little while before it quickly left his mind. Should I enter the black hole? Issei suddenly stopped in his tracks and closed his eyes, feeling the dark energy of the black hole pollute his dimension. Continuously knowing what the aura and energy of the anomaly felt like meant it was quite easy for the omnipotent being to pinpoint its location down to the nearest millimeter. He could feel its shape and its gravitational pull in his mind and how it wanted to consume everything it could, even though it was unable to suck anything into it. Issei couldn't even figure out how it was surviving without consuming any matter. Maybe it was designed to survive without eating anything. Maybe it was designed to eat and kill Issei and nothing else, even if he was technically immortal and unkillable. Maybe it was a portal into another dimension or universe that would entertain Issei for a little while. That wasn't likely though, as Issei has exiled himself from the human world. Issei released a breath as he edged closer to the anomaly, the strong gravitational pull threatening to pull him off of his feet. He stepped back once and sighed, scratching the side of his head before he began to move towards the thing that consumes all life. I guess it's time to figure out what this thing does. He jumped, watched as the darkness approached at a rapid rate and closed his eyes, anticipating his death. Ouch, my head. Issei held his head in his hands with grit teeth as a multitude of colors and sounds hit him like a freight train. From a standing position in a corridor, he stumbled towards a nearby wall and quickly fell onto his knees, dropping his hands from his skull and onto the floor to hold him up. A hand reached up to cover his mouth as he gagged and retched, bile flowing from his throat and into his mouth at a steady rate. After a few moments, his mouth was filled with his own vomit and he had no choice but to release the contents all over the wooden floorboards that he had been staring at for the past minute. Issei's throat burned, his eyes watered and his nose would only inhale the acidic scent of his putrid stomach acids, despite his attempts to not breathe. However, his body would fight for the oxygen it needed, even if vomit was continuously spilling out of his throat, so he choked on his own vomit, spat up a ball of phlegm instead and wiped his mouth with his sleeve once he had emptied the contents of his stomach all over the floor beneath him. Issei fell back onto his bottom with his arms supporting his body while he stared up at the roof, gasping for air. He glanced at a few spectators, rolled his eyes with a heavy sigh when he realized they weren't going to help him and spat into the large puddle of vomit in front of him. Blech. I forgot that stomach acids and bile taste absolutely disgusting. However, it is nice to know that I made it back to the human world after so long. Issei slowly pushed himself to his feet and used the wall as a support. Now. He fell forwards with a loud thunk and lay still with his head in the puddle of vomit, watching as his vision slowly darkened. Someone rushed over to him, crouched down next to him and shouted some words that landed on Issei's temporarily deaf ears. Soon, the only thing he could cherish was the sweet darkness of sleep. But Issei knew he had lost consciousness, and when his eyes fluttered open in what seemed like a few seconds later, he wasn't surprised at all. The nurse's office, huh? Issei frowned and stared up at the cream ceiling, not daring to move his body in the slightest. He knew that his appearance in the human world should be devastating, but because nothing had happened, he could only assume that he possessed the body of another Issei. To Issei, that explained everything from his vomiting to his passing out, but he couldn't figure out why he had ended up possessing an Issei's body. He could care less though. There were too many universes for the omnipotent being to count, so a little bit of fun in one of them shouldn't cause any damage, even if he had eliminated what could be considered the protagonist of this universe. Every Issei was destined for greatness in some way, even if it's nonsensical or villainous, and that's how they obtained their protagonist status. Just because they existed, the universe would continue to exist until their eventual death. That's how it always has been, and that's how it would stay. Even if they acquired the ability to become immortal, someone or something always found a way to kill them. But this Issei, the true Issei, was a real immortal being, one who would regenerate even if every single atom of his being was single-handedly destroyed and spread across the far reaches of the multiple dimensions in the universe. There was simply no way to kill him, and that was that. If his body was destroyed, he'd reappear and there was nothing no one could do about it. In a sense, Issei was glad that he was the true Issei. It offered him the chance to do so many things he would have never dreamed of doing while in his original universe, but his status as the true Issei of the multiverse carried many negative implications along with it. Such as an eternal life that he wished would end. Ah, Issei Hyodo, you're awake. Issei slowly craned his neck towards the direction of the speaker, and he wasn't surprised to see the school's nurse standing next to his bed, a small smile on her face. Yes, I am. Now, what do you need me to do before I can be set free? I have things to do. The nurse giggled and sat on the edge of Issei's bed, a clipboard pressed against her lap as she idly spun a pen in one hand. Well, are you feeling nauseous? Nope. The nurse ticked a box on a piece of paper. Can you move? Issei raised an arm, twisted his head to the side and bent his leg at the knee. Yes. The nurse ticked the second box on the same piece of paper. Any known medical conditions? The nurse paused for a second before she chuckled to herself, tucking the clipboard under one arm. I don't need to ask that question. All of your medical details should be on your file. The nurse enthusiastically jumped to her feet and turned to face Issei. You're free to go, but if you want to stay a while to regain your strength or ask me some questions, feel free to. School has only just ended, after all. Issei's eyes followed the nurse as she pushed a curtain to the side, one of the few things Issei hadn't seen while staring up at the roof, and as she fell onto a chair where continued to fill out some paperwork. Issei quickly resumed his staring contest with the roof and frowned. Wait, does that mean I'll have to go through school again? Issei paled as he already knew the answer to his question. Issei removed a kink in his shoulder with a single shrug, appreciating the end of the school day. He rolled his neck on its base, stretched his arms out above his head and moaned from the pleasure, ignoring the game he was playing on a handheld device that was lying flat on his desk. He hunched over ever so slightly, staring up at the blackboard and the homework task that was written on it before he turned his console off with a single tap of a button. Homework? Who needs homework? He muttered to himself as he shoved his textbooks and handheld into his bag. You need homework to get good grades, Issei. The teacher called out from the front of the class. Issei glared at her for a second, shrugged his shoulders again and pushed his chair out with his feet, stretching his legs out before he stood up. He pushed his chair under his desk, stood behind the lump of wood as he stretched his arms out for the second time and grabbed his bag off of the floor, slinging it around his shoulder and under his arm. Well, I already have good grades so I don't need homework. The teacher grinned and chuckled as Issei slipped past his classmates, 90% of them female. That's up for debate, Issei. You never know what your score is going to be on your next test. Issei stopped at the doorway of his classroom and glanced in his teacher's direction. Yeah, I get it. I should do my homework to improve my grades, but I won't because I think they're a waste of time. The teacher chuckled again as she collected some papers from her podium. "See you tomorrow, kid." "See you tomorrow." Issei left the classroom with a smile. The class he had just been in, which was chemistry, was his favorite because the teacher made it very entertaining. Even though Issei already knew all of the material the class was studying because of his omnipotence and thirst for knowledge, he found the lessons to be informative and educational because the teacher had a passion for teaching. Not to mention the humor and relatable topics she usually incorporated into her explanations and class discussions. Now, where to go? Maybe I could go wipe the floor with the kendo club again. No, that's too easy. Maybe I should go join the track team because I'm so fast. No, winning all the time isn't fun at all. But it does boost my already large ego. Issei slowly made his way home as he thought about the various clubs and communities he could join at his school. A lot of them were entertaining, such as the kendo club and the track and field club, but a lot of them were too easy for him. He was physically fit and strong, had the fastest reaction times possible and could easily win in a fight against a normal human, so he never joined any club because he knew he would always win school and national tournaments, even if the leaders of the clubs continuously begged him to join. Issei always denied their requests, though, as he had one goal. That one goal involved a certain fallen angel, a red-headed devil and an introduction to the supernatural in this universe. The easy life wasn't fit for Issei and Issei wasn't built for the easy life, so ignoring the supernatural wasn't the easiest thing to do. However, this time around, on his second time experiencing everything again, Issei would change the events that had happened in his universe, even if it destroyed the world. All he wanted was a little fun, anyway. Hey ho, how does it go? It's me with this story. For returning readers and the new adventurers, I thoroughly welcome you. To the returning readers, how is my third-person writing? Better than my first person? Of course it is. It's subjectively easier to write in third person than it is in first person. To the people who read Touched by Death, don't worry. I'm still writing that one. Don't forget to follow this story and leave reviews. I'm not asking you to, so you totally should. Winking face. See you next time. Chapter 2. A small flicker of flame danced around in Issei's cupped hand. It would run along the lines in his palm, twirl around his finger and then jump back into the center of his hand, appearing to dance in a joyous fashion. Its brightness increased as it flared once, twice and then thrice as it slowly grew in size before it suddenly exploded into a small cloud of smoke. Issei clenched his hand shut to hide the smoke from his peers and his teacher, even though he was sure that his educational instructor had seen the whole thing. Issei didn't mind though. He knew his chemistry teacher was a laid-back woman who wouldn't call him out on it in front of the entire class, choosing to keep him after class for a little while, and that was what Issei was hoping would happen. Today was the day that a normal Issei would almost always be killed by Rainier the fallen angel. However, being the one true Issei and an immensely powerful being meant that fate could not control what happens to Issei. Instead, Issei would control fate itself and bend its will to bother others for his fleeting amusement and entertainment. After living for a millennia, one would usually run out of things to do, so these childish acts were the only things that Issei was able to cherish. Alright, guys. I expect you to read page 70 to 80 in your textbooks for homework. That means you too, Issei. Oh, could you also stay behind for a bit, kid? I have a few things I want to ask you. Class dismissed. In a flurry of movements, most of Issei's peers shoved their things into their bags, followed by their immediate departure. A couple of students hung back in the classroom, conversing amongst themselves as Issei stretched his arms above his head. Did you see my little trick, huh? Issei moaned as his shoulder cracked in its socket, waves of numb pleasure rushing down his spine. He lowered his arms, gathered his textbook and game console and placed them in his bag, waiting for his teacher to respond. The young woman stared down at him with a frown, her hands on her hips. If you think I'll believe that that was real magic, you must think I'm an idiot. Although, it was pretty sweet. Issei sheepishly rubbed the back of his head with a grin, his mind shouting from joy as his cover had not been compromised. Deep down, Issei knew that Rias Gremory had detected his magic, as well as Sona Citri, and instantly regretted his impulsive action. However, he knew that those two would pass it off as nothing more than a mere coincidence and leave at that, but if he tinkered with the arcane once more on school grounds, he'd have more than few answers to question, as well as a few people he'd be seeing. Thanks, I guess. Issei's teacher grinned and ruffled the messy hair of what seemed to be an innocent young boy in her eyes, a groan of complaint coming from said boy. But don't mess around in class like that again. I know you think school is boring, as well as homework, but I at least want you to listen in class so you have a decent chance of getting a high grade. Issei scratched his cheek with a faint smile. Well, I do try my hardest to complete my homework, but it's just so boring. The teacher chuckled. I agree with you there. When I was at school, which wasn't too long ago mind you, I absolutely despised doing homework. I also hated how angry my teachers would get when I openly admitted that I hadn't even tried to complete it. The teacher folded her arms and leaned on a nearby desk. Issei supported his head with a hand as his eyes lazily tracked the teacher and he sighed, noticing the setting sun in his peripherals. They only wanted the best for you, just like you want the best for me. However, that doesn't mean I'm doing my homework because you care for me. I'd rather waste my time playing video games. The teacher rose an eyebrow. You remind me of myself when I was your age. Issei grinned and reached into his bag, pulling his handheld out with an extravagant flourish of his hand. Wanna play? I bet I could easily beat you. The teacher huffed and pushed herself off of the desk she was leaning on, shoving a hand into a pocket. I would if I still wasn't at work. Issei's grin fell into a pout as the teacher walked away from the omnipotent being, a faint smile present on her face. I have things to do in the staff room, kid, so you're gonna have to leave now. As much as you hate to hear it, I can't leave you in here for safety reasons, yada yada yada. All of that crap. Issei shoved his handheld back into his bag and pushed his chair out with his feet. Fine, fine. I'll spare you the trouble of dealing with a teenager who's filled with angst and leave. Issei stood on his feet, pushed his chair under his desk with a single hand and slung the strap of his bag around his neck, feeling the comfortable weight of the useful accessory under his opposite arm. Angst? You are literally anything but that monster you just described. Issei chuckled and quickly left the classroom with pocketed hands, waiting in the hall for his teacher as she collected a few papers off of her podium. I'm still not doing my homework, though. Issei shouted as he waited for the educational instructor, the sun slowly falling behind the horizon outside the window he was facing. The sun was still bright and gave the sky a comfortable tangerine hue, but it brought comfort to the immortal being as he had forgotten what a sunset had looked like. Issei's teacher, after she had grabbed her bag and had left the classroom, locked the door behind her. She furrowed her brow when she noticed Issei, held a hand to her hip and loudly cleared her throat. You're still here? I'm sure you have better things to do, kid, like the homework that you're supposed to complete. Issei snorted and casually waved a hand in front of his face. Dying is better than doing homework, you know. Issei's teacher sighed and ran a hand through her hair. Of course it is. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. If you don't kill yourself over doing your homework, that is. The teacher winked and left without saying another word, a hand raised as she slowly strode down the lengthy corridor. Issei sighed and scratched his head as he awkwardly stood in the middle of the corridor, not a single soul in sight. In the distance, the shouts and cries of ordinary teenagers doing ordinary things were very much recognized by the omnipotent being, something he continued to listen to until they faded away as he began his trek home. Maybe I could buy myself an ice cream before Rainier finds me, he had muttered to himself, gripping the strap of his bag until his knuckles turned white. No matter how hard he had tried to stall the inevitable, fate somehow found a way to control Issei's future, even if it was for a single moment, and he absolutely despised that. He despised the fact that the meeting with Rainier was a predetermined event, something that was unavoidable. Issei fell onto his bed with a pleasured moan, collecting the fabrics of his bedsheets in his hand. He clenched his fist, slowly shut his eyes and smiled, knowing that he had avoided a very painful death just by avoiding his killer on his way home. Even if he was set to die many days after his initial meeting with Rainier, it was still reassuring to know that the encounter that would lead to his death didn't even occur. The meeting on the bridge, Rainier's innocent act, the promise of a date. None of it happened and Issei genuinely felt safe. Right, to celebrate my life, maybe I should do some homework. Issei sat up, silently yawning as he did so, and reached into his school bag. He pulled his handheld console out of it, eyed the plastic electronic device for a few seconds, grimaced and tossed it onto the empty bedding next to him. He retrieved his textbook and an empty notebook from the bag and silently flicked through the pages of his textbook, an eyebrow twitching from annoyance. He rapidly flipped through the pages. So I forgot what my homework was, huh? Issei groaned and threw his books onto the floor where they would stay until the next morning, the two objects silently weeping from their lack of attention and use. He didn't care about the inanimate objects' feelings, though. They couldn't even have emotions in the first place, so the thought of a book crying forced a grin onto Issei's face because it was a stupid and idiotic idea that came from an omnipotent being. Having nothing productive to do with himself, Issei sighed and decided he'd dedicate himself to his video games. He grabbed his handheld, turned it on with a press of a button, and held it above his face as he fell back onto his bed, the ceiling above him blurred because of the intense focus his eyes were placing on the console. As Issei saw the first pixels of light on the menu screen of his favorite game, 3 piercing knocks were heard on his door, followed by the opening of said construct. In stepped his mother, a grin on her face as she pounced into the room. Issei, a girl called Yuma Amano is at the door. She said she wanted to talk to you. Is she a friend of yours? Life or death? It didn't matter to the omnipotent being. He'd regenerate in minutes if he was killed outside of his own home, so there was no reason for him to be afraid. His hands were trembling, his hair shadowing his eyes. No, he would tell himself. It wasn't fear he was feeling. It was excitement. He was excited. Excited to change the fate of this poor Issei by killing the fallen angel. The being that would have inevitably killed this otherwise ordinary human child. And that human child did not deserve that excruciating pain. Issei crept over to his window and peered through a gap in the curtains. In the dark night street, in front of his house, was Rainier the fallen angel in the form of an innocent schoolgirl. It wasn't anything Issei couldn't handle. He could simply torch the impure being before they could say anything and be done with the whole thing. But Issei didn't want it to end in a single second. He wanted to savor the feeling of victory, the screams of the fallen angel as she burned to death. A smile crept onto Issei's face. It wasn't a joyous smile. It was a psychopathic smile, one that you would expect to see on a serial killer's face as they stalked their next victim. Issei didn't have to stalk his victim, though. They had willingly come to him, and they would pay for what they had done in the many universes Issei had observed. I'll be down in a second, Mom. Issei said in a sickly sweet voice. Issei's mom left the room with a satisfied nod, leaving the door open behind her. Issei continued to stare out the window for a second before his smile left his face. He gripped the side of his head with a frown, pain erupting through his skull as he forcefully pulled his hair in its socket. What's wrong with me? Has this omnipotence made me insane? Issei turned away from the window. So, what do you want? I don't know you. Issei and Rainier were in a more private place for their conversation. It was only a nearby park that was designed for children, but Issei found himself sitting on one of the 2 swings in the park because there was nowhere else to sit. Not even a simple bench. Rainier stood in front of Issei, her hands in the pockets of her Kuo Academy blazer. Issei immediately noticed this difference. To blend in and to easily lure Issei outside, Rainier would have obtained a Kuo Academy uniform to trick him into believing that she was a student he had made contact with. However, Issei knew better than that because he had watched the fallen angel deceive the various versions of himself multiple times. Well, this is kinda embarrassing, but, would you go out on a date with me? Issei jumped to his feet. I refuse. He had shouted, a nearby flock of birds shooting out of the trees they were nesting in. Any man with common sense would deny a girl that had seemingly followed them home. A girl would confess to the boy during school hours or leave a letter in their locker that requests their presence at a certain location, not trail behind them for a rough 30 minutes until they reached their home. Everyone knew that was weird and creepy, even the most deranged beings in the universe. Rainier pouted and crossed her arms with a huff. Why? Issei grinned and pointed a finger at the fallen angel with his other hand on his hip, an aura of confidence exuding out of him. Firstly, he would try to persuade the fallen angel to leave him alone. If that didn't work, he'd fight and possibly kill her. Knowing the fallen angel, she'd fight before Issei's persuasion could start and it would lead to the death of one of them. Issei thought it would be Rainier. Because you don't go to my school. Rainier spluttered and motioned to her uniform, trying to gather her words. But I'm wearing the uniform. Students can only get it, right? Issei laughed as brashly as he could, his other hand now on his hip as he stared up at the sky. That's possible, but you could have stolen it. Also, I know you have a secret that you mustn't share with an ordinary human. Rainier used her 2 wings to launch herself back. Her teeth grit, as a giant dust cloud formed. Issei couldn't see through the thick smoke, but he had extraordinary sensory abilities, so blocking Rainier's strike was too easy for him. Why you? What do you know about me? Issei deflected Rainier's kick with a hand, watching as several limbs darted in and out of his Issei's limited sight. All of them had been perfectly deflected with ease. Meanwhile, Issei remained silent to try and provoke the fallen angel. But as Issei narrowly avoided a light spear by tilting his head to the side, he decided he'd need to speak up lest he be killed by his own foolishness. I know you're a fallen angel and that you want to kill me because of a sacred gear I have inside of me. Issei summoned a rapidly spinning ball of wind in his palm and threw it up into the air, watching as a silent explosion instantly dispelled the cloud of dust. Rainier was panting, sweat dripping from her face, shock present on her face due to the wind explosion and the fact that Issei was unfazed by her assault. He wasn't even out of breath in the slightest, not a single hair was out of place, and he certainly wasn't impressed. TCH. You're stronger than I expected. Issei pursed his lips as he owlishly blinked. You reckon? I mean, I'm just an ordinary human, right? Rainier growled and pointed a finger at Issei. Ordinary human? You're anything but. That doesn't matter, though. Soon, you'll be dead. Rainier lunged at Issei with a light spear in her hand, her wings propelling her at speeds that were barely visible with the naked eye, her spear aiming for the human's heart. He stepped to the side, grabbed Rainier by the hair and pulled her head back as hard as he can, a grin forming on his face as Rainier screeched from the excruciating pain that erupted all over the back of her head. So I'm not an ordinary human, huh? Oh well. Issei lifted Rainier into the air with an arm that had been reinforced with magic, the fallen angel kicking and screaming and demanding that she be put down or else. Issei chuckled in response and stared into the impure being's fear-filled violet eyes. That means I can kill you, right? Issei rose a hand that had instantly been consumed by a raging blue fire, inching his appendage closer and closer until it was a mere centimeter away from the fallen angel's chest. And no, please don't kill me, Issei manically grinned. Mercy? Do you want mercy? You don't want me to kill you when you tried to kill me? Rainier tried to nod, but because she was being held up in the air by her hair, she couldn't move her neck. Rainier growled and launched a fist at Issei's face, watching as it connected with his nose. However, Issei laughed in response as it bounced off of him, finding Rainier's tenacity to be idiotically humorous in what could potentially be her final moments. You're too prideful to properly beg for mercy, aren't you? All you can do is nod your head and move along, right? Rainier grit her teeth. It's not like that. Now let me down. Issei's hair shadowed his eyes. You'll only be let down when you're dead. Hi, me here. Thanks for the support on the first chapter, everyone. I hope I live up to your expectations. Talking about expectations, have I met them yet? I know a lot of you have followed this story because Issei is omnipotent and godlike, which he is. But I want to know if you also enjoy my writing style. It's tough being a good writer, you know. When your story becomes popular, you think people expect great things from you, so you start to question the quality of your writing. Don't forget to leave reviews. Previous ch2 of 23 next. Chapter 3. So you're going to kill me now, huh? Rainier grimaced and stared down at Issei. She was powerless, left without hope and certainly dead, and the fallen angel knew that. She knew that there was no hope for her. No hope for survival and no hope to atone for her previous sins. This was because a puny human had somehow, acquired an absurd amount of power that could easily defeat a fallen angel of the lowest ranks. Rainier chuckled at the thought because it was unbelievable to her, and probably to her comrades, due to the minimal amounts of effort the human had to use to beat her. It was simply unbelievable. Rainier started to regret her foolish decisions. She shouldn't have come to this town, to this country. She shouldn't have entered the human world in the first place, even if she was under orders from her superiors. She shouldn't have fallen for Kokebiel's persuasive words and should have continued to faithfully serve under Azazel. If she had done so, she wouldn't have been in this mess because she wouldn't have been ordered to kill Issei Hyodo, a potentially dangerous human whose power hadn't awakened yet. He wasn't dangerous though. That's what she had realized. Issei wasn't a danger to the Grigori or any fallen angel just because he's a unique human. Issei wouldn't have hurt anyone if Kokebiel wasn't involved because no one would have hurt him. Rainier grit her teeth. To her, it was Kokebiel's mindless spiel that brought her here, and she would forever hate that manipulative bastard because he was the mastermind behind her death. He was essentially fate itself. You think I should kill you now? Issei smirked with a glint in his eyes. Rainier could tell he was planning something, and she knew she wouldn't like it. She knew it would be painful, possibly morbid and generally bad for her, even if she was already in an extremely negative situation. I know you won't do it, Rainier said through grit teeth. Her eyes became sharp as she tried to sound confident in what seemed to be her final moments. However, Issei chuckled and dropped Rainier to the floor, clapping his hands together a few times. He planted a foot on Rainier's chest between her bust and held up a single hand that had 3 fingers raised. And I won't. You have 3 choices, though. Rainier was shocked. Her eyes were wide and she made no effort to resist. All she could focus on was calming her mind and heart because she wasn't going to die. Not straight away. She could scream and shout and cry and kiss Issei's feet because he was showing her mercy, but she wasn't done with him. She wasn't free yet. Her life wasn't secure. All she needed to do was escape and she would be free. She'd never listen to Kokebiel again, she'd stop acting like an arrogant fool, and she'd certainly never harm a human again. 3 choices. She muttered, her voice barely a whisper as her bottom lip quivered. Issei nodded his head with a manic grin, bending down so his face was a few centimeters from Rainier's. He cupped her chin with a hand, forced the fallen angel to stare into his large, psychopathic eyes and chuckled. Your wings and magic, your friends in the abandoned church, or your life. Rainier grit her teeth once more and furrowed her brow in anger. She didn't know how Issei knew about her friends or the abandoned church, but she wouldn't be surprised to know that Issei knew all of their names. What made her angry was the choices, though. In Rainier's eyes, Issei was essentially saying that he would permanently maim her, kill her precious friends or comrades, or end her life in an instant. You psychopathic little shit. Rainier hissed in pain as Issei dug the heel of his foot into Rainier's ribs, applying more pressure as time went on. Issei sighed and released all of the pressure he was applying, eliciting a gasp from Rainier, before he shoved his hands into his pockets. Issei found no pleasure in what he was doing, but he had to do what he had to do. He wanted the fallen angel in front of him to feel the pain that various versions of him had felt, even if it involved permanently destroying a part of her. An infinite amount of deaths makes up for one heartless destruction, after all. Do you want me to take your wings, the part that makes you a fallen angel, and your magical abilities, your friends' lives in return for your safety, or do you want me to kill you? It's as simple as that. Rainier bit the inside of her cheek as hard as she could and let the coppery taste of her foul blood fill the inside of her mouth. She stared up at Issei with a blank expression and watched as the human crossed his arms, a smirk present on his face. If you don't answer within 10 seconds, I'll decide for you. Issei raised a single finger, indicating the first second, followed by the second finger, and then the third, fourth and fifth before Rainier's face melted into one of exhaustion. You decide for me. All of those options, they're absolutely awful. Rainier closed her eyes and felt the presence of Issei's foot disappear from her chest. The omnipotent human took one step back and sighed, his grin disappearing almost instantly. Your wings and magic it is, then. You know, if you had chosen to sacrifice yourself, I would have let you be. If you chose your friends, then I would have killed you. Regardless of all of that, you have let me decide your fate, and it will be the most painful. Have fun. Rainier grimaced and raised her head, staring at Issei. Just get it over with. Issei folded his arms with closed eyes. I shall grant your wish. Issei made his way to Rainier's side and rolled her over with a single arm so she was laying on her stomach. He planted a foot between Rainier's 2 outstretched wings and grabbed the left wing by its base. Are you ready to receive your punishment, fallen angel Rainier? Rainier grimaced and gathered a handful of sand from the floor, clenching it as tightly as she could. Yes. Issei managed to take a long, shaky breath and steeled himself, gently tugging on Rainier's wing before he gathered all of his strength to tear the wing from its roots. Rainier screamed from the explosive pain, her body writhing and trembling as one half of her identity as a fallen angel was viciously torn out of her back. Issei held the wing in one hand, watching it spasm with a knot in his stomach, before it was engulfed by a red flame that consumed it in an instant. Blood burst from the hole where Reinare's wing was as she held back the bile that was preparing to launch out of her throat, grinding her teeth together as she did so. Issei grabbed the second wing and swallowed a ball of saliva that had formed in his mouth, the edges of his lips curling up in satisfaction as he fought back a maniacal laugh. Issei gently tugged on the wing once, twice and then thrice before the second wing was sent flying from Reinare's back, more crimson blood spilling out of the wound. Reinair vomited on the floor in front of her, her whole body sweating and shaking as she could not cope with the excruciating pain that a mere human had enforced upon her. She tried to hold back the overwhelming downpour of her tears but found that she couldn't, her heart crying out from the emotional and physical pain she was feeling. Her eyes went wide as she gasped, feeling all bodily sensations leave her, before she stopped all movement, laying still in the middle of a park in a puddle of her own blood and vomit. Issei staggered back a couple of steps before he fell onto his backside, both hands gripping his head as he manically grinned. He chuckled with an insane murmur and released a laugh of pure evil, feeling the blood on his hands stain his hair and cheeks. The laugh died down as soon as it had come, though, quiet grunts all that remained. Issei slowly pushed himself to his feet with a frown, a hand still pressed up against his head. There's something wrong with me, Issei, with a click of his tongue, glanced over at Reinare's still form. Shit, she's going to die at this rate. I never meant to do this, right? It was all an accident, right? I still need to take her magic, but that's too cruel. Maybe I could just restrict it? I need to do something, fast. Issei's quiet affirmations were the only things that were keeping him from sinking further into a psychopathic and sadistic state. I'm going insane. Reinair slowly opened her eyes, her mind a hazy mess. She raised a hand to her face, covered her eyes for a few seconds, and dropped her arm back to her side with a groan. She tilted her head to the side, staring out of an open window and into the sunrise before she shot up into a seated position. She pressed a hand to her forehead, suddenly gasping for air as she began to panic. She glanced around the room, noticed that there was no one else in the enclosed space and sighed, her panic dying down almost instantly. The room was almost featureless. A small desk sat up against a wall with a computer quietly sitting on its top, an almost silent hum coming from the metallic tower that contained all of the parts that a computer would require. A keyboard and mouse sat on the desk while a half-swung-out leather chair sat still. On the chair was a pile of neatly folded clothes, bloodied fabrics that Reinair instantly recognized. She slowly wiggled out of the bed she was laying in, her body extremely stiff and tense, waddled over to her clothes with a frown and stared down at a sheet of paper. She picked it up with a hand and scanned it with her eyes, muttering the text she read. I'm generous enough to have let you live. Anyway, your shirt and blazer are practically destroyed, but I left them there in case you wanted to wear them. Feel free to do whatever you want, as well, but if you leave the house, I will know. I'll be back at around 4. Issei. Reinair scrunched the paper into a ball, her entire being seething as she tossed the paper onto the bed behind her. She clenched a fist, her hair covering her eyes, before she released a shaky breath that instantly extinguished her anger. She flicked her back so she was staring up at the blank cream roof, clicked her tongue in annoyance and sighed. I guess I should feel thankful, but also pissed at the same time. Deep down, Reinair wanted to tear Issei's limbs off and beat him to death with the damned things, but not before she mutilated him in the same way she had been. Without her wings or magic, Reinair was nothing anymore. She wasn't a human, but she wasn't a fallen angel, either. There was no classification that could describe what she had become, nothing she could identify as, and it was all thanks to that human. Reinair had become lost and she had realized that as she tried to flare her wings out. She wanted to make sure it wasn't all a dream, after all, so she tried her hardest, despair quickly filling her as her two appendages wouldn't appear. There was no sensations on her back, no warmth of the skin, and there certainly weren't the two wings she was hoping to see and feel. The cold reality had quickly sunk in. I'm really not a fallen angel anymore. What's worse is that I'm stuck in this schoolgirl form. Reinair huffed and tried her hardest to hold back her tears, but as they began to slowly run down her cheeks, the salty liquid warm against the skin, she fell to her knees and sobbed. I am broken, I'm nothing now, Azazel will never love me. The only reason Reinair had done what she had done other than following Kokebiel's orders, was to gain the affection of her crush. Azazel the scapegoat, the leader of the Grigori, the only one that would accept her when no one else would and the only man that brought a smile to her face. She'd never see him again, and if, by chance, they did meet in a sick twist of fate, Azazel would cast the former fallen angel out of the Grigori and into the human world, forever. That's what Rainier thought, anyway. She didn't know anything about herself in this moment, and she certainly didn't dare to think about anything other than Azazel, as she was hoping that he could fix her. He's a genius scientist with a bit of a perverted side, but there had to be some way he could fix her. But Rainier knew he couldn't. Without their wings, a fallen angel, an angel or a devil were worth nothing. They were considered to be trash. Rainier knew she wasn't going to receive the help she needed from Azazel. She'd have to look elsewhere, find her own methods of fixing her body, but she didn't know how she'd go about doing that. She was never going to be the same. Yo, it's me again. Hope you liked this chapter. It took a week. Oh well. I couldn't decide what to do with Rainier. I wanted her to suffer, but I didn't want her to die or just be tortured. So this is the result. I hope you're happy with it. It may also be my love of her because, you know, in previous stories, she doesn't die. But I've taken a different path this time. Sorry for the sudden decrease in quality, as well. I wrote this while not in the right state of mind, so it may seem different. Don't forget to leave a review. See you next time. First, previous ch3 of 23. Next, chapter 4. The halls were mostly empty. The sky was a clear blue. Issei's feet rapidly pushed off of the floor with as much might as he could. Damn it. Why are they being so hostile? With a mighty roar, Issei leapt down a flight of stairs and landed in a crouch, his balance almost faltering. As he finally fell onto his back, he used a hand to push himself into a flip, narrowly dodging a strike from some kind of weapon as his eyes widened. They're here already. All right, kids. You're dismissed. The teacher, an elderly man who had once served in a war as a foot soldier, quickly left the room with a few books under his arm, a faint smile on his face. Issei sighed, flayed his arms over the edge of his desk and placed his face against the wood, struggling to understand the class he had just been through. Art wasn't his favorite subject or pastime. He couldn't draw, couldn't sculpt and couldn't paint. He could barely hold a paintbrush without trembling hands, even though he could hold a blade with a steady grip. He wasn't nervous. Nothing could make the omnipotent human nervous anymore, but something about the practical arts, especially the type of sculpting that involved clay, made his hands tremble. Not to mention the confusing vocabulary the teacher often used. Man, this class sucks, Issei huffed and stared through a nearby window. His eyes tracked the only cloud in the sky, a small puff of white that lazily soared through the air. Time seemed to quickly pass by as the cloud finally left the sight of the human, but as Issei lazily checked the time on his phone, he sighed. Only 5 minutes have passed, and lunch break has just started. Issei lifted his head off of his desk and glanced around the room. People were grouped up and were happily eating their food around a desk or desks that had been pushed together. They would talk, often laughing with each other or at a single person's silly comment, creating a ruckus in the classroom. Issei frowned and furrowed his brow. He didn't appreciate the noise his classmates were making. On any other day, he wouldn't mind, but with the events of the previous night rushing through his mind, all he wanted was silence. Issei was half expecting a visit from a member of Rias Gremory's posse as well, increasing his unknown paranoia, anger and annoyance. Issei slowly inhaled with closed eyes. He knew he shouldn't be angry at anyone other than himself. The monstrosities he had committed last night were the things he should be angry at, not a bunch of innocent girls that had nothing to do with him. HMPH, I'm such a pitiful being. Issei pushed his seat out from under his desk with his feet and glanced out the window once more, noticing the clear azure. He slowly shook his head and jumped to his feet, shoving both of his hands into the pockets of his blazer as he used his foot to kick his chair back under his desk. He left the classroom and wandered the corridors of Kuo Academy, occasionally glancing behind him, as he struggled to come to terms with what he had done. In Issei's mind, the thing that had permanently destroyed Rainier's body wasn't him. It was an amalgamation of centuries of isolation and loneliness that he couldn't control. The sadistic pleasure, the laughs, the smiles. None of it was Issei Hyodo. Issei couldn't fool himself, though. He knew that he had willingly done what he had done, and as he had begun to brood, He shook his head and had told himself that it was all right. This universe was one out of an infinity. Issei could simply return to his dimension, sit on his gaseous throne and watch the struggles of another Issei. Permanently maiming Rainier wasn't a complex issue anymore. But if Issei really did return to his dimension, he'd become bored again and step into the black hole once more, potentially possessing another Issei. He'd probably hurt Rainier again as well, and he knew that. Issei knew he'd lose control again. He knew he'd turn into that sadistic monster once more. He knew he'd hurt Rainier again. Issei clicked his tongue. Why am I even thinking about this so much? I could kill Rainier and get this over with, but I guess need to take responsibility for what I have done. Right. I feel guilty. Ultimately, Issei decided to live with what he had done. He didn't even know if he felt guilty, but he did regret what he had done. Issei only told himself he was feeling guilty because he wanted a reason to justify why he wanted to take responsibility. Issei blinked owlishly. Did he even need to do anything if he claimed that he wanted to solve what he had done? As far as he knew, there was no way a being could regrow their wings without growing stronger or gaining an absurd amount of power. Even then, the destroyed wings wouldn't regrow. A new pair would form in its place and replace the old pair, most likely where the old pair should be. The fallen angel would have the power of a four-winged fallen angel, but only have a single pair of wings. In other words, they'd seem weak to the people that understood how an angel's ranking of power worked, when they would always be a rank higher than what people thought, and that was deemed to be a good thing, as the difference in power between a single and a double set of wings was absurd. Alright. I've figured out what I can do to fix this issue. Issei held his hands on his hips as he puffed his chest out in pride, ignoring the reactions of a single bystander. Issei calmed himself with a chuckle, released his pose with a sigh and huffed. Well, now that I've figured it out, it's no fun, bah. What am I saying? It'll definitely be fun. What will be fun? Issei Hyodo. Issei spun on the base of his heel and came face to face with a person that he knew was a devil. All along, while wandering the halls of Kuo Academy, Issei had been unconsciously avoiding Yuto Kiba and Kaneko Taju, two of the four devils that made up Rias Gremory's peerage. And, with a faint smile and closed eyes, stood the blonde swordsman, Yuto Kiba, the only knight in Rias' peerage. Yuto Kiba, leave me alone, blondie. This has nothing to do with you. Issei waved his hand around in dismissal. Yuto chuckled, took a single step back and bowed to Issei. My name is Yuto Kiba, as you already know. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Issei crinkled his nose in distaste. The overly polite princes were not his type. Kiba was a guy, that much was obvious, but on the off chance that Issei stopped liking women, Kiba would not be his first choice. His attitude was irritable, after all, and it was a sickly sweet combination of negative feelings. Two negatives make a positive, huh? Issei had muttered to himself, watching as Kiba straightened his back. Issei frowned, glanced down the corridor behind him and noticed a small blob of white hair. Kaneko Taju and Yuto Kiba. I wonder what you guys want with me. Does your king really feel safe without her only knight and rook? The air turned cold and the atmosphere became heavy. There was a sword poised towards Issei's throat, the tip barely touching, but Kiba's confidence in his ability to intimidate and subjugate Issei was laughable at most. It was laughable for the omnipotent being, anyway. Issei Hyodo, the human, no, rather, I should call you a monster. Rias Gremory, our master and king, has called for you. Kiba's eyes were sharp and full of distrust, while his curled lip and snarl actively revealed his dislike for Issei. The omnipotent being clicked his tongue as he resisted the urge to face Palm. Despite his need for entertainment and something to clear his mind, he shouldn't have openly revealed his knowledge of Rias and her devils. Issei knew that, and that was why he was silently reprimanding himself. A one-sided fight between two miniature versions of Issei taking place in his brain. There's no point in fighting here, so I submit. Although, the next time you point a sword at my throat, you should be mindful of the innocent bystander. Maybe I should keep my mouth shut next time, as well. Issei motioned to the only human in the corridor and watched as they stepped away from an open window, staring down at their phone. Kiba glanced at them from over his shoulder, lowered his sword and let it disappear in an instant. His fists instantly clenched as he scowled. Show me the way, pretty boy. Kiba clicked his tongue and turned away from Issei, pacing down the corridor with a hand in a pocket. A female student left a classroom, noticed Kiba and immediately screamed from joy, gathering the attention of her nearby peers. In a matter of seconds, the knight was surrounded by his female fans, their screams drowning out any and all words he wanted to say. Gone was the unattractive scowl, a wide smile comfortably sitting in its place. Issei stood dumbfounded, failing to believe in the sudden change of personality. He also couldn't understand why the female students liked him so much. Was it his looks? His personality? His stupid blonde hair and annoying smile? Issei grumbled insults about Kiba to himself as Kaneko approached his side. She tugged on his sleeve and used a finger to point to the end of the corridor that was adjacent to the group that was surrounding Kiba. "Hey, Kaneko, I don't get it. Why do people like Kiba so much?" The small girl shrugged once as Issei pouted. "That lucky prince, stealing all of the potential love interests." Issei raised a decorated cup to his lips and tilted it on a slight angle, letting an herbal liquid spill into his mouth. He lowered the cup, placed it down onto the saucer with as much elegance as he could before he turned his head to face Akeno Hamejima, his upperclassman by 1 year, with a smile on his face. "Thank you for the tea. It's delicious." Akeno, the busty senior with large violet eyes, long raven hair that was usually tied into a ponytail with ribbons, pale skin and sadistic tendencies, blushed and held a hand to her cheek. "Thank you, Issei." Issei's smile widened as he muttered a few words under his breath. "Definitely a Yamato Nadeshiko." Issei glanced at the devil that was sitting on a red couch opposite him and let his smile falter ever so slightly. Rias Gremory, the heir to the Gremory pillar, his also busty senior and a person who he didn't want to deal with. She had flowing crimson hair, blue-green eyes and skin that was just as pale and milky as Akino's. "What was that, Issei? And where's Kiba?" Rias asked, her head tilted to the side. Issei slowly shook his head, insisted that it was nothing and detailed how Kiba was indulging in his carnal desires, emphasizing his hidden love for all of his fangirls, before he raised his cup of tea to his lips once more, slowly devouring the contents as he struggled to predict the contents of the incoming conversation. On one hand, Issei wanted to be serious for once, but on the other hand, he wanted to have fun. Having fun would make the meeting more bearable for him, so it was the logical choice. The only question he asked himself involved his starting point. How would he create an entertaining situation in a meeting where a few words could create a fight? "So, Rias Gremory, are you really a male that pretends to be a female? Also, do you have a certain fondness for camels?" Rias rose an eyebrow as a blush spread across her cheeks. What do you mean, Issei Hyodo?" Issei grinned and crossed one leg over the other, intending to embarrass Rias as much as he could while using his superficial knowledge of devils. "Well, it means what it means. Have you heard of the Ars Goia, cherry trap?" Rias recoiled from the sudden nickname she had acquired, her cheeks flushing more than they physically should as Akeno quietly chuckled in the background. "You mean the forbidden spellbook?" Issei furrowed his brow. As far as he knew, the Ars Goia wasn't forbidden in any country or state. It was accessible if one used the internet, and that was how Issei had acquired all of the information on the 72 demons of hell, even if it was supposed to be fiction. "Forbidden? What are you talking about?" Rias sighed dejectedly. "All of the copies that exist in the human world have been destroyed. It's sensitive information. Now, how the hell do you know what the Ars Goia is?" Issei pursed his lips before he huffed from an indistinguishable annoyance, tapping a foot against the carpeted floor as he stared directly into Rias' eyes. "The Ars Goia. An anonymous spellbook that is a part of a series of 5 books. It is the first part of the grimoire that was known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, and it details the 72 demons of the underworld and their individual powers and qualities. Gremory, who was one of the aforementioned demons, is said to be able to tell all things past, present and in the future, about hidden treasures, and is able to procure the love of women, young and old, but especially maidens. Depicted as appearing in the form of a beautiful woman with the crown of a duchess tied around his waist, he rides a camel. Is the information in it true?" There was a short silence between the pair as the atmosphere slowly became heavier as a battle of wills silently took place. Was Rias going to tell that human why the Ars Goia is forbidden in the human world, or will she capture him and take him to her brother for knowing such information? The only way he could have acquired the information was, in Rias' eyes, if he went straight to the underworld, and that was a serious breach in security. Rias sighed as all of the tension in her body was released at once. Yes, the information is mostly true. I assume you know the history of the three factions? A short nod from Issei was all Rias needed to continue. The original demons, once they had died, had left fragments of their souls in the underworld. Long story short, a few, lucky, descendants take on the qualities of their ancestors. The reason why it's forbidden here is because it's pretty much true. Issei couldn't stop the smirk that spread across his face. And you, Rias Gremory, have taken on the qualities of Gremory. That's why the student body and teachers absolutely adore you, right? You filthy trap. Issei and Akeno chuckled in unison as Ria's face turned as red as the ripest tomato, her eyes wide and her mouth firmly clamped shut. After a second or two of shock, Rias regained her senses and growled, preparing to lunge at the human that sat directly in front of her, intending to tear his throat out with her bare hands. You, don't make fun of me like that. The trap part isn't true. Demon magic fixed everything. And I don't like camels, damn it, they're ugly. Akeno pat Rias on the back. There, Rias. It's okay. We all know it's true. Rias quietly screamed through grit teeth as Issei resisted the urge to say more. Through a couple sentences, he was driving the redhead insane. Shut up. Damn it, shut up. Issei briefly stopped laughing, sat up as straight as he could, his face stoic as he professionally held back all of his laughter. No, cherry trap. Rias pouted. Fine. I give up. Call me whatever you want to. I don't care. Issei rose an eyebrow. Well, you clearly do, cherry trap. Rias was now banging her head against the wall, both the wall and her skull quietly breaking as Rias' blood splattered everywhere. Oh my. I thought you said you didn't care, Rias. Akeno muttered as she cupped her cheek with a hand, her cheeks also red. However, as Akeno squirmed on the spot with her thighs rubbing against each other, Rias, whose hair was shadowing her entire face despite the sunlight that should have normally dispelled all shadows, robotically turned her head to face her queen. Two circles of red flickered into existence where her eyes should have been. All of the color in the room instantly drained. You wanna die? As Akeno and Rias disappeared and reappeared in a flurry of punches and kicks and magic attacks, Issei quietly sipped on his cup of tea with a small smile. Isn't this fun, Kaneko? He asked the small girl who, without making any sounds, had found her place on the couch next to him. She stopped nibbling on a block of chocolate, glanced up at Issei with stoic eyes and nodded once, quickly returning to what she had been doing. I agree. There's no better way to derail a conversation. At least I don't have to explain what I did last night, even if I did use cheap tactics. Anyway, where's Kiba? Is he busy finding the parts to Excalibur? Hey, Rias. Come here. Huh. Why? Issei slipped his arm into a complex array of magical circles and used all of his strength to yank a sandy camel out of the circles as if it was an everyday occurrence. Because you like camels, right? Issei grinned as Rias paled. No, I don't. Now get that thing away from me. Rias turned to run, tripped over a carefully placed wire that was almost invisible, fell onto her face, screamed as the camel jumped on her and proceeded to pass out from the shock, a miniature version of her soul slowly seeping out of her mouth. In the background, Issei sighed. And here I thought she'd love camels because of her status as a Gremory, even if she denies it. Heya, late chapter. Don't mind me. I just procrastinate too much. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I decided to go for the comedy escape route at the end here, even though I'm bad at writing comedy, so I didn't have to laboriously explain all of the crap that everyone knows. But that bit at the start is foreshadowing at something that happens in the next chapter. Anyway, no one knows about the Ars Goetia, so I had to explain that. Oh, thanks to Hellsender for telling me about it, though. If you didn't know, which I don't think you do, I've started to beta a story. It's called Re-Zero, Why Me? And is written by writer with bad grammar. So if you have the time, please check it out. I've only done the prologue, but I work hard on it. It's almost as if it's a part of me. See you next time. First, previous ch4 of 23 next. Kiba burst through the doorway as Rias and Akeno finally found their inner peace, both girls panting as they glared at one another. They weren't in the best condition. There were tears in their clothing, they had scratches in their skin and their hair was disheveled. Am I interrupting something? Kiba asked with a small smile, ignoring the blob of white hair and the suspicious human that were lounging on one of the two sofas as if nothing had happened. Ah, Kiba, we were waiting for you, Rias managed to say between her rapid and heavy breathing. Rias straightened her back, used her hands to pat her clothes and hair back into place and wandered over to the empty sofa, promptly falling onto her backside with a sigh. So, should we resume what we were doing, Gremory? Issei interjected, placing his cup of tea that, despite the fact that Issei continued to consume the tea inside of it, kept on refilling itself on a saucer that sat on the coffee table in front of him. We should, Issei. Now, as I was going to say, I have asked you to come here because of what you did last night. Namely, the fight that you had with fallen angel Rainier. Issei, with a leg crossed over one another, sighed and folded his arms across his chest. Despite his efforts to derail the conversation with a little bit of bullying and fun, it would have happened sooner or later. Issei knew it was naive to think that he could have avoided the entire situation, but it didn't stop him from trying. The fight? Oh, you mean the part where I tore her wings off and carried her back home because I went insane and then felt guilty because of what I had done? That fight. No one said anything. Rias didn't move a muscle, Akeno sighed, Kiba frowned and Kaneko continued to nibble on her chocolate. Rias made the first effort to say anything. Something that would dispel the silence and the awkward atmosphere. Why yes, that one. Well, there's nothing to say about it, other than my desire to look after Rainier as she adjusts to her new life as a pseudo-human. Now, was this all you needed me for? Issei prepared to jump to his feet but was stopped by an outstretched hand that Rias had suddenly offered. That's not all. I wanted to offer you a choice that may change your life. Whether you accept it is up to you. Issei jumped to his feet this time and shoved his hands into his pockets, staring down at Rias' hand. No thanks. Becoming a devil is too tacky for me. Maybe next time, though, which will be never. Issei approached the nearby door, stopped as he held a hand on the handle and craned his neck. Also, when am I going to meet your brother? I'm sure he's going to be interested in me, especially after this conversation. You know about my brother? Issei groaned and face-palmed. Right, next time I should keep quiet. Otherwise, I'll say something I regret. Rias rose an eyebrow and withheld her questions, intending on releasing the otherwise ordinary human boy. Issei turned the handle on the door, slowly opened it and stepped out of the room, glancing out of a nearby window. The sky was a clear azure. His hand tightly gripped the handle as he slowly pushed it down. He prepared himself, intending on bursting through the door while acting as normal as he could, but he stepped back with a sigh, running a hand through his hair. Issei didn't think it would be difficult to check on Rainier. On one hand, he thought she had ran away, had hoped that she had ran, because he didn't want to deal with the results of his foolish actions, even if he had, hours prior to this moment in time, told himself that he wanted to take responsibility. On the other, he still wanted to look after her, even if she denied his offer. Issei raised a hand and rapped his knuckles against the door 3 times, eagerly waiting for a response. He shifted the position of his bag that hung under his right shoulder, dropped his hand back to his side and silently sighed. Is she even here? Issei whispered with bated breath. He didn't know if Rainier was still in the house. Traveling through his house and up to his room was uneventful because the living room was empty, as well as the kitchen and the yard. They were the only places the fallen angel could have been on the bottom floor, and the lack of presence worried Issei. For all he knew, Rainier could have run away while he was at school. Not that it would matter, though. If Rainier really did run away, he would continue his life as if she had never existed in the first place. He was bluffing when he said that he'd know if she left the house, though, and that was the only precaution Issei took to keep her in his home. Rainier didn't need to stay at his place. If she wanted to, she could have run to the abandoned church where her friends were located and seek guidance from them, but in Rainier's mind, her friends would shun her, maybe kill her, for having no wings. There was nowhere for the fallen angel to go, no one the fallen angel could go to and no one that would help her. And Issei knew this. He had figured it out during his classes. It had taken him a few hours, but he had figured it out with the knowledge he possessed from the many timelines he had watched. Because, no matter what was different about Issei or Rias Gremory, the fallen angel Rainier and her friends would always stay the same in every single timeline. Issei gripped the door handle again. I'm coming in, Rainier. Issei swung the door open and observed his room. It mostly remained untouched. Nothing about it was different, except for the multitude of blankets that were curled up on his bed. The curtains hadn't even moved a millimeter from their last known position. The desk was still clean and tidy. The note that Issei had written was still sitting on Reinare's pile of clothes and the wardrobe door was shut tight. Nothing had changed. Issei dropped his bag on the floor and sat on the edge of his bed, occasionally glancing at the bundle of fabric. "Hey," he said, gripping the frame of his bed as tightly as he could, his knuckles turning white. "Are you awake?" There was no response from the bundle of blankets. Issei shakily sighed and unconsciously ran a hand through his thin locks of brown hair. "I regret what I did, you know," he muttered, his head hanging low. There still wasn't a response. "I wasn't in the right state of mind. I had seen many things similar to what you were trying to do and I snapped, I guess." Issei didn't know why he had said that. Knowing about several timelines, feeling the pain of death, watching as he suffered, Issei had finally understood why he had gone insane. Knowing that he could save himself, save the body of the Issei that he was occupying, forced his darkest emotions to surface after centuries of suppression. He had never gone insane, never maimed a being beyond repair and had never found himself feeling guilty for what he had done. "If you regret what you have done, then would have killed me already. Why won't you end my suffering?" Reinare's voice was barely audible through the dense wall of fabrics that she was hiding under, her naked body curled into the fetal position. "Because Reinair poked her head out and glared at the omnipotent human, her teeth bared as she scowled. Issei struggled to find the right words. Was his guilt the only thing was preventing him from murdering the fallen angel in cold blood? Or was it his humanity that was preventing him from doing so? "I'm sorry, Reinair. I truly am." "Sorry? The only thing you can do is apologize?" Reinair crawled out from under the mound of blankets and stopped short of Issei's side. "Why won't you just kill me?" Issei shuddered as Reinare's whispers echoed through his mind. Should he kill her? It would be the right thing to do, he thought. She didn't want to live anymore, so it's okay if I spill her blood. Unwanted memories surfaced in Issei's mind. His original timeline, his own life. Memories from what had occurred in the original universe had suddenly found themselves in the brain of an omnipotent and almost omniscient being. Issei struggled to dispel them. He struggled to get rid of them. He didn't want them. They reminded him of his monstrous actions that he had tried to forget. The imaginary sound of dripping blood forced Issei's eyes to widen. No, he thought, I can't kill Reinair. I can't repeat history. I was meant to change the future, right? If I kill her, history will follow the same path that it had once followed. I can't allow it. I can't let fate manipulate me again. This time, I'll be the one who decides what happens. You don't understand, Reinair, Issei finally muttered. A hand collided with his cheek, forcing his head to snap to the side. I don't understand. I don't understand. You are the one who does not understand. Issei held a hand to his cheek, his hair shadowing his eyes. He grit his teeth in an effort to hold back a sob, tears welling up in the corners of his eyes. All I need to do is kill her. End her life. Everything will be over if I do that. History will run its course and I'll have to repeat all of the things that I have once done before. Is this the consequence of disturbing a timeline? I'm sorry. A tear fell from Issei's eye and onto his knee. Reinare's face softened at the sight, her expression slowly relaxing until she looked as if she was exhausted. She sighed, fell onto her bottom and crossed her legs, her hands firmly planted in her lap. I shouldn't have gotten angry at you, she muttered. Issei glanced at her through his blurred vision and faintly smiled. You have every right to. Reinair sighed and ran a hand down her face. No, I shouldn't have. I was lucky enough to have not been killed and I should be grateful for that. Maybe it would have been better if I didn't do anything at all. Maybe I should have let you fool me. Reinair reached a hand out and gripped Issei's shoulder, forcing him to turn and face her. She smiled at the human. Thank you. Issei rose an eyebrow. For what? For not killing me. Issei rubbed his eyes and sighed. You're welcome, I guess. Reinair grinned. No problem. Issei raised his eyebrow again. That's a weird expression to say after thanking someone. Reinair pouted and puffed her cheeks out. It is not. Issei sighed dejectedly. I should be the one who says that, not you. You're not any fun. Issei opened his mouth to retort Reinare's statement but quickly closed it. Something was approaching their location at an absurd speed. No, it wasn't a something but was a group of somethings. Shit. Rainier, put some clothes on. Something's approaching at an insane speed. Rainare's cheeks flushed as she was reminded of her indecent state and, as she scrambled to grab her pile of clothes on Issei's desk chair, she fell off of Issei's bed and onto her face, a groan of pain coming from her mouth. Issei face-palmed, pulled her to her feet, ran over to his wardrobe and flung it open, throwing a loose white shirt at her as she rubbed her nose in pain. She grabbed it, gracefully slid her arms through the sleeves and started to button it up. As she finished the top button, something exploded through Issei's window and the thick curtain, skidding across the floor as they landed on their feet. It was a man. It wasn't any ordinary man. In fact, it would be an insult to call it ordinary or a man as he was a fallen angel. He was one of the strongest in the Grigori, to be precise, so his appearance shocked Issei. His arrival in this town wasn't scheduled for another month at least, so whatever he was doing in this town was without Rias Gremori's permission. Kokebiel, the angel of the stars. Rather, the fallen angel of the stars. How may I help you? The tall man glanced at his subordinate before he sharpened his already sharp and intimidating crimson glowing eyes. I'll be taking my subordinate back, human. If you try to stop me, I'll kill you. Hey. This is a semi-late chapter. I get that. Procrastination is my worst enemy, so blame them, not me. I swear it's not my fault. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, let me tell all of you something about this chapter. This version that you just read was the third out of 3 versions. That's right. There were 2 versions before this one. I have them archived if you want to read what's different, but you'll have to PM me first. Also, does this chapter seem to be fast-paced, rushed? Regarding Issei's out-of-place flashback, that has meaning for the main plot of this story. And also his decision to spare Rainier. I really need criticism. Preferably constructive criticism. I realized I'm not getting any better at writing, so I need all of you readers to help me. If you find that something doesn't make sense or you have any tips to make my writing better, please don't hesitate to tell me in a review or a PM. See all of you next time. First, previous ch5 of 23 next. Chapter 6, Rainier growled, seeing the object of her hatred. Kokebiel cast his uninterested gaze on her for a second before it returned to Issei, the corners of his lips curling up as the human made no effort to move. So, you said you'd kill me, right? Issei finally said, one hand on a hip as he observed his nails in a mocking manner. Kokebiel's half-smile disappeared in an instant as it was replaced with a deep frown that Issei paid no attention to. Kokebiel raised a single hand in the air, summoned a spear of light and tossed at the human in front of him, said spear shattering mid-flight as Issei sighed. So we're doing this the hard way, then. No matter. Because you're in the process of betraying Azazel, it shouldn't matter if I kill you. Kokebiel's eyes widened as Issei took a single step forward. How do you know that? Issei grinned as he lunged forward and pulled his fist back. I know a lot of things. Issei responded, ignoring Kokebiel's question in its entirety. Issei released his fist, watched as Kokebiel disappeared in a flurry of wind and pouted, retracting his fist from an imaginary stomach with a small groan of disappointment. So do I? Issei twisted his body to the side and whistled as Kokebiel's fist, an appendage that was almost invisible to the naked eye, flew past his face. Issei spun around with his arm outstretched, not expecting his backhand punch to connect with Kokebiel's face. As bone connected with flesh, though, Issei rose an eyebrow. All of a sudden Issei's world was tipped upside down as he flew through the air in an arc before an elbow connected with his stomach, sending him flying into the floor at breakneck speeds. Issei coughed up blood as he hit the floor, bouncing once, before another elbow collided with his stomach, sending him through the floor beneath him and into the middle of his living room. Issei rolled to his side, dodging a pointed hand that was aimed at his throat, before he scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. Issei pulled his fists close to his face in a boxing stance. You're pretty good, Kokebiel. Issei called out to the fallen angel, the angel of the stars glancing at the human as he clicked his tongue. And so are you, human. Although, you are not good enough. Surrender and I will spare you. If you wish to continue, I will murder you as my subordinates take Rainier away from this place. Issei used his sleeve to wipe the blood off of his face, a dark grin soon consuming his features. Bring it on. I'll kill you before your friends get here. Kokebile rose an eyebrow. Oh? A challenge? Issei took a single deep breath before he dug his heels into the hard ground, his face hardening moments later. Let's go. In an instant, Kokebile disappeared once more and reappeared behind Issei, both of his hands clasped together above Issei's head. Kokebile, with as much force as he could muster, lowered his two hands, expecting his attack to crush the skull of the puny human that stood in front of him, unmoving. But when his attack met nothing but air, it was Kokebile's turn to receive an attack to the head. Issei's fist smashed against Kokebile's head as the fallen angel tried to lunge forward to dodge the attack, but because his body was too slow he was forced to tank the hit. As soon as Issei's attack hit, Kokebile spun around and launched a fist at Issei's face, the human leaning back to dodge the strike as soon as he saw it. Issei sent a straight jab at Kokebile's face in return, the fallen angel jumping back twice to create some distance between the two, crushing a coffee table in the process. Issei greedily panted for air. Man, even if I do have the ability to make this body super strong and fast, I can't force it to have good cardio. He muttered to himself, watching Kokebile as closely as he could. Is something wrong, human? Kokebile asked, observing the human's body. While Kokebile was able to discern that he had an unbelievably large amount of mana, his body was weak. The only reason the human was able to hurt him was because of the magic that constantly reinforced his body, making it faster and stronger than Kokebile's. Nothing, yet. Issei said grimly. He wasn't looking forward to his future after his fight. With his extremely bad cardio, he was most likely going to die. Issei ducked under a punch as Kokebile appeared in front of him, Issei's hand forming into a fist as he jumped up. Kokebile tilted his head back and dodged the attack, a grin spreading across his face. It was nice playing with you, boy. Kokebile muttered. The wall crumbled under Issei's back as he was sent flying through it, plaster exploding everywhere as the air in his lungs escaped his body. Issei smashed through a fence, collided with the outside wall of his neighbor's house and bounced off of it, slowly soaring through the air and towards the dirt ground. All of a sudden, Kokebile was floating above Issei, a spear of light in his hand as he pulled his arm back. This is the end. There was a small explosion of dust as Kokebile's attack connected with something. Because the two of them were fighting faster than the eye could see, the fallen angel couldn't see if he had hit the human. But it was a guaranteed hit. With no way to dodge or move, Issei was certainly dead. Kokebile stood in the midst of the dust cloud, his hands folded against his chest as he huffed. That human should have surrendered when he had the chance. The dust cloud slowly settled. Hunched over, panting as blood streamed down his face from a wound on his head, Issei stood in the middle of a small crater. He gave a shaky thumbs up, fell onto one knee and quickly used a hand to support himself. You almost had me, Kokebile. It's a good thing I have a few tricks up my sleeve. Kokebile quietly growled. What's this? You should have died. Issei grinned and chuckled, slowly finding the strength to stand on his 2 feet. Apparently not. Kokebile rushed over to Issei and produced 2 light spears, one in each hand, and raised them into the air. But you will die now, human. Issei glanced up at the light spears and sighed as they descended upon his head, both weapons shattering upon impact as if they were nothing but a window pane. Try again, Kokebile. Another spear exploded, followed by another and then a third. Kokebile growled and grabbed Issei by the head, lifting him up into the air. Just die already. Issei would have shaken his head if he had the freedom to do so. Sorry, but I can't die. Not yet, at least. I have a world to destroy and a future to change. Kokebile sharpened his eyes. Destroy the world? Issei chuckled and cast his gaze upon Kokebile as if he was nothing but a small joke. Yeah, totally. Like I'm strong enough to destroy the world. Kokebile threw Issei at the ground and watched as he casually bounced off of it as if he was a ball. Issei turned his body in the air, landed on his feet with a small grin and bowed. If you're stupid enough to believe that, then I think you should leave, Kokebile. Unless you want to discuss astrology, that is. Ha, you're nothing but a fool. By now, Rainier is no longer in your home. My subordinates have already taken her away from here. Issei sighed. Do I have to raid the Grigori now? Kokebile turned away from Issei. If you care for Rainier, I suggest you do. Issei watched as Kokebiel disappeared in a flash, dust being kicked up from a strong gale that he had left behind. The human stared at the setting sun as he sighed. Next time I won't graciously spare you. A voice reached Issei's ears as he observed his healing wounds. Man, to think I got all sentimental and emotional a couple of minutes ago, and it was all a waste. It didn't even make sense. Whoever's making me do this stuff is pretty bad at their job. Issei's words trailed off as he stared at the gaping hole in his wall, his mouth wide open as he struggled to form any words. My parents will surely kill me. Cherry Trap, I require your assistance. Ria's eyebrow twitched as she dropped her cup of tea, the porcelain smashing on the hard floor. Rias did not want to see Issei at all. After their earlier conversation and the embarrassment that she had suffered, it was normal for an elegant being such as herself to feel irritated at the sight of such a horrendous human that could make anyone do unspeakable things. Rias still forced herself to smile with eyes that were clamped shut. If she didn't have her eyes hidden, she would surely glare at the object of her annoyance so much so that they would suddenly catch fire and transform into a pile of ash. Why yes, Issei? Issei jumped onto the couch opposite Rias with a deep frown. I may have unintentionally made a hole in the wall, and the roof, at my home, Rias deadpanned. Was the human in front of her serious? Did he really make a hole in the roof and wall of his house of his home? He was surely joking, but if his frown was anything to go by, Rias was able to see that Issei was telling the truth. It didn't matter, though. The devil had no intention of helping him. I can't help you, Issei. Issei pouted. His hopes and dreams were instantly shattered. The one person that could help had denied his request, and it was all because of a little bullying that had occurred earlier in the day. Issei inwardly winced. I guess every action does have a consequence, he muttered to himself. Rias nodded in agreement as she folded her arms under her bust with one leg crossed over the other. I would have to agree with you there, Issei. Despite the fact that Issei had been denied, it didn't mean he wouldn't beg and grovel until he got what he wanted. He didn't have any pride or sense of shame that was stopping him from getting on his hands and knees with his head hanging low, even if there was porcelain all over the floor that would cut his skin. He thought that pride was for the arrogant and that shame was for the idiotic. So as he took a deep breath and prepared himself to shout for what he wanted like a true Japanese man, he realized that nothing was going to stop him. His mind and spirit were invincible. Rias Gremory. I beg of you to help me fix the hole in my roof and wall. Rias would later say that she saw the window panes shake in place as Issei screamed. The devil hurriedly covered her ears with her hands. I will do anything in return for this favor. Even though Rias was covering her ears with her hands, the screams were loud enough to penetrate the physical mass that was blocking the sound waves that would surely deafen the devil. Her hands offered very little protection at this point, so Rias dropped them down to her side with a groan of annoyance. Did you mean it when you said you'd do anything if I helped you? Issei looked up at Rias from his position on the floor and nodded his head so fast it could have snapped his neck. Rias hummed in thought and raised a hand to her chin, contemplating on what she would have Issei do. Should she tell him to stop calling her by that humiliating nickname? Maybe he would become a devil in Rias' peerage. He would be a great asset, after all, as he was stronger than her knight and rook combined. In fact, Rias thought that Issei would be able to defeat her knight, rook and queen with all three fighting as one. Yes. Rias grinned as she looked down at Issei. In return for humiliating her earlier on in the day, she would force him to suffer a fate worse than what she had suffered. Rias slipped one of her shoes off of her feet and pulled her sock off, wiggling her toes in the air as a devilish grin spread across her face. If you lick my foot, I might help you. Sorry, no can do. Issei called out as he opened the door to the clubroom. Rias held a hand out as she scrambled to her feet, rushing over to the human. The devil fell to her knees, grabbed the human's trousers with an iron grip and let fake tears stream down her face. I'm sorry. I won't make you lick my feet. I realized that it's a perverted thing to say and do, so I'm sorry. Please don't bully me anymore. Sorry, no can do. Issei said as he stuck his leg out to the side, shaking it around in the air as he tried to get Rias to let go of him. He sighed, realizing that she wouldn't let go and awkwardly limped over to the couch, the devil sliding along the floor as she kicked her legs around as if she was having a tantrum. Get up. Issei said as he looked down at the devil who was in a pitiful state. No. I don't want to. Issei crouched and grabbed the wrist of the devil, tightening his grip. Shortly after, with a whimper of pain and more tears, Rias forced herself to let go of Issei, holding each wrist in the air. "Oi, cherry trap, are you still a baby?" Rias discontinued her tantrum and pushed herself to her feet. She coughed into a hand, sat on the couch that was behind her and folded her arms, acting as if nothing had happened. That was what she wanted, anyway. Rias didn't want anyone to know what had just transpired. It was embarrassing and would ruin her reputation, but if she knew the human as well as she thought she did, he'd most certainly spread rumors of her disgraceful behavior if she did not help him. By unintentionally having a tantrum, Rias had given Issei some material to use as blackmail. Sorry about that. I lost my composure for a second. Issei shot Rias a look of disapproval as Rias had turned into a child for several minutes, not a single second. Even though Issei was taking Rias' words to heart and did not think of them as nothing more than an excuse and a simple saying for the time frame in which all hell had broken loose, Issei couldn't help but feel disappointed. Was this all the fun he would find in this conversation? That was more than a second, you know. Issei responded with a shallow exhale as he stared at the devil's red cheeks. Right. Anyway, I'm still not going to help you, Issei. This was your own fault. Rias' words left Issei with no choice. Because he was intending on hiding the fact that there were fallen angels in Rias' territory, namely Kokebiel and his friends, he had to hide the truth. But, now that he was left no choice, he had to tell Rias about everything that had happened because he wanted his wall and roof to be fixed. You leave me with no choice, Rias. Rias rose an eyebrow, not understanding what Issei was trying to say. What do you mean? What do you know about Kokebiel, the angel of the stars? Issei stared into Rias' anxious blue-green orbs and waited for her response. The devil, however, had many thoughts rushing through her mind at speeds that were incomprehensible. Was the second most powerful fallen angel in her territory? If he was, what was he doing there? Was he planning on kidnapping her or killing her? Did he want to start another war? Rias? Are you okay? Issei said after a minute of silence, knowing why the girl in front of him was not responding. If someone had come to the conclusion that an extremely powerful being was currently living on their land, anyone would be shocked. He's here, isn't he? Issei nodded once with a grim smile. The truth that he was trying to withhold had finally been revealed and there was nothing he could do about it. Rather, there was nothing he could do to withhold it. It was an important piece of information that Rias needed to know because of the danger of the entity that was involved. Unfortunately, he is. That's why I have a hole in my roof and wall. He wanted to take Rainier away, even though she hates him now, and I refused. So we fought. Rias recoiled from the shock. In her mind, there was no way Issei, a human who, using her knowledge about him, had barely managed to defeat a fallen angel of the lowest rank, would be able to fight toe-to-toe with Kokebiel, an entity that is just as powerful as her brother. You managed to ward him off. Issei snorted in response to Rias' words. He didn't make Kokebiel run away. Kokebiel missed his finishing attack because of a little hat trick that Issei used, one that involved wind magic, the ground and plenty of skill. Suddenly creating a burst of wind to pivot your body was harder than it sounded, and Issei's flawless execution of the trick was a testimony to his real skill. Not really, he ran away because I dodged his finishing skill. That, and he was stalling for time. Rias ran a hand through her hair. She was anxious and stressed. No, she was more than anxious and stressed. She feared for her life and she didn't know what she would do about it. Should she call for her brother's aid? No, it would take too long for reinforcements to arrive. Anything could happen between now and then, so would it be best if Rias and her peerage, as well as Issei, raided the place that Kokebiel was staying at? Issei, what do we do? Rias muttered, hoping that the immensely strong human that sat in front of her could help her. She needed guidance. She can't ask her brother because he would freak out and possibly start a war. She couldn't get help from her parents because of the same reasons. Sona Citri, her friend and fellow devil, wouldn't help because most members in her peerage were inexperienced or weren't powerful enough. There was no one that could help her. On the one hand, she didn't want to start a war, but on the other, she wanted help from a powerful being. Issei spoke, I say we engage in a skirmish. It's our best option right now. Rias nodded once, approving Issei's words because she wholeheartedly agreed with the human. But two questions popped into Rias' mind. When would they strike and where would they fight? They didn't know where Kokebiel was staying. He could be in the underworld for all they knew, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. If Kokebiel was in the underworld, everything was fine for Rias. The potential crisis had been averted. But, if he was in the human world, where was he? But we don't know where he is. Rias responded. Issei held a hand to his chin and hummed in thought. If they wanted to find Kokebiel, they could rely on Kaneko and her senjutsu, even if the Nekomata didn't want to actively use it because of her past. It wouldn't be a good idea to suggest it, anyway, as Issei is supposed to have no knowledge of that power. Not yet, anyway. Does anyone in the peerage have a sensing or tracking ability? Rias frowned. The only person was Kaneko, but without using her senjutsu her sensing ability was rather weak. We have Kaneko but, she won't use her power. Issei pursed his lips. There was nothing they could do, then. If Kaneko wouldn't use her power, they wouldn't be able to find Kokebiel because it would take too long to scour the whole city and its surroundings. There was one place he could be, though, but Issei highly doubted that Kokebiel would be there. The abandoned church on the hill, he might be there because of a group of his subordinates that were hiding under the building. When do we strike? Rias asked, hoping that Kokebiel wasn't there. As much as she hated to admit it, she didn't want to die so soon, even if she had to fulfill her duty as the lord of her territory. Tonight. Gather your forces. I'll be a scout. Rias nodded once as both the human and herself slowly made their way into a standing position. I must go, then. If I don't find Kokebiel or any fallen angel there, I'll give you a call. Oh, can I have your phone number if that's the case? Issei dug into a pocket and pulled his cell phone. Despite the high speeds and strength that was displayed during his fight with Kokebiel, his phone was surprisingly fine. Ah, right. Rias procured her phone from a pocket in her skirt. Before I go, I have one request. Rias tilted her head to the side as Issei copied her contact information onto his phone, appropriately naming Rias' contact file as Cherry Trap. What is it? Issei grinned. Fix the holes in my house. No bonus reel today. Maybe next chapter. I couldn't think of anything I could use for a bonus reel. Nothing that would be funny, at least. Anyway, how do you like these speedy chapters? I had a sudden burst of motivation and inspiration to write this, so don't expect these to come out every day. I tried something new for the second half of the chapter. Does everyone like it? Can I please get some feedback on it because I want to know if it actively makes my writing and the story better? See you next time. First, previous ch6 of 23 next. Chapter 7 The forest that surrounded the old, desolate building was silent. There was nary a sound nor a living being in sight, other than a group of 5 that skulked behind a dense thicket of greenery. The trees would not move and the grass would not wave in the wind. Not the best night for a stealth operation. Issei Hyodo, one of members of the group of 5, had muttered. So what do we do? Rias Gremory asked in response, her arms folded against her chest. Issei shot her an annoyed look and sighed. With their earlier conversation still fresh in their mind, Issei had expected the devil to remember what they were supposed to be doing. It's not as if they were planning to sneak into the abandoned church and assassinate Kokebiel. Issei had explicitly mentioned that he and the Gremory peerage would launch an assault or skirmish of some kind instead. Gremory, we're going to assault the church. You know, that thing where you guys blow everything up? Rias sighed and massaged the bridge of her nose. She wasn't prepared for what they were going to do. Attacking a fallen angel base that may temporarily house one of their strongest warriors was suicide. Especially if you didn't have the power to defeat them. But Gremory knew she didn't have to worry about Kokebiel. Something was telling her that Issei could defeat the Angel of the Stars, even if the human did look weak. Yeah, we get it. We defeat the small fry, you take on Kokebiel, and everyone wins. Correct? Issei chuckled. It was questionable if everyone would win, but the odds did seem to be in their favor. Somewhat. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Don't come in until I say you can. Issei watched as Rias sighed before he burst through the thick clump of bushes that hid them from an outsider's view, his hands placed in his pockets. As he approached the large double doors that were made of a hard wood, he contemplated how he would enter the building. Did he want to kick the door open and vaporize anyone that may be in there with fire magic? Or would he jump through the door and create a hole? Maybe he would destroy the whole wall just by walking through it. Issei came to a stop in front of the doors. He glanced up at the small circle of stained glass that comfortably sat above the arching doors and huffed in amusement, noting that the church seemed to be more of a small cathedral with its stained glass, high ceilings and spires. It was different from what Issei had seen in his own timeline, and the omnipotent human could confirm this. In fact, in all of the other timelines he had seen, it had still been the same abandoned church that had a simple design, not a small cathedral that was grand and luxurious. With a raised foot, hands still in his pockets, Issei planted his foot against the double doors and forced them open, the hard wood cracking as they smashed against a wall on either side of the entrance. Issei peered into the building, furrowing his brow at the lifeless interior. There were many rows of pews with an extravagant altar that was covered by a golden-trimmed fabric sitting at the end of the building on a raised platform. There was also large colored windows that depicted several religious figures and events, obscuring any view to the outside world, with a large circular pane high above the altar, barely illuminating the walkway between the pews. But, despite the fully furnished and untouched interior, the building was devoid of life. There was absolutely nothing. Well, that was anticlimactic. Issei slowly muttered, further observing his surroundings in case Kokebiel had planned an ambush. Not that Kokebiel knew of their planned assault. The fallen angel had thought he had done quite a good job in hinting that he was under orders from the Grigori. However, Issei could see through Kokebiel's earlier statement. The fallen angel was betraying Azazel, a topic that Issei had briefly mentioned before their fight, so it would be an embarrassment for Rias to claim that Azazel was at fault for what he had ordered Kokebiel to do. So, with Issei's knowledge of many timelines and his own experiences, the human knew that Kokebiel would be somewhere in the human world. Somewhere overseas was obviously too far for the ordinary fallen angels to travel, so if Kokebiel wanted backup in a fight, he had no choice but to stay in the local area. The town that Rias had lordship over was the best choice, Issei concluded, as he could easily hide from the naive devil. It wasn't as if she was powerful enough to take him down in the event that he was discovered, so the Angel of the Stars should be more than confident in his ability to stay safe in case he really was discovered. Issei slowly approached the altar after confirming that there weren't any enemies that were hidden in the shadows. However, even if Issei did have the ability to strengthen his body with magic, he wasn't able to increase his night vision, so if a fallen angel or stray exorcist was fully dressed in black and was standing in a corner away from the moonlight, they'd be able to hide from the human as if it was child's play. And that is exactly what had happened. A man pushed himself off of a wall in a corner and silently approached the altar, stopping short of the extravagant structure. He clasped his hands together in a prayer, muttered a few words to himself and turned around, his red eyes sharp. He wore a black fedora, black coat, black pants and an unusually dark red scarf that covered his mouth with a pair of black boots that covered his feet. There was a gun that sat in a thigh holster and a sheathed sword that was connected to his waist. A stray exorcist, Issei whispered to himself, his fingers twitching in anticipation, an indescribable feeling welling up inside of him. Issei's breath quickly became ragged as a grin spread across his face, insanity threatening to consume him as the stray exorcists slowly made their way down the stairs of the platform that the altar was built on. Issei's mind temporarily became blank before his thoughts came back to him, all preconceived notions of stopping his insanity disappearing in favor of thoughts that involved the murder of the stray exorcist. In the back of Issei's mind, he knew he had fallen to his insanity once more. Indeed. The man's gruff voice echoed throughout the hall as he spoke, sending shivers down Issei's spine. The omnipotent human's grin morphed into a toothy smile of madness, a quiet chuckle building up in his throat. My name is Fried Selzen. What is yours, human? My name is Issei Hyodo. It's a pleasure to meet you. Issei bowed so as to mock the stray exorcist. Fried stopped short of Issei and stretched his fingers out as he prepared to grab his gun, intending on ending the human in front of him. Fried wasn't killing Issei because of his friendship with a devil but because of Issei's insanity that had been displayed as soon as Fried had shown himself. It was quite pitiful in his mind. After all, a human that had fallen to madness instead of harnessing his powers was something that required some pity, even if it was just a little bit. Are you associated with the devils of this territory? I sense their presence in the area. Issei chuckled in response, his eyes tightly shut. Even if I told you, it wouldn't matter. Fried rose an eyebrow in response to Issei's ambitious statement. Ho! You think you can beat me, human? Issei chuckled in response and was in front of Fried in an instant, his hand in the form of a fist as he pulled his arm back. Fried widened his eyes in response and twisted his body to the side to dodge the strike, surprise consuming his mostly concealed face. Of course I can, Fried. Issei muttered as his initial strike missed, multiple thoughts rushing through his mind. The rational side of Issei was telling him that Fried wasn't supposed to be sane. The stray exorcist should be the deranged man that had a vulgar mouth and a violent personality. His irrational side ignored his rational side and told Issei that all of it didn't matter and that as long as he killed Fried, everything would be okay. Issei realized that it was his irrational side that was feeding his insanity, but it was too late to stop his transformation. He was already insane and had become what Fried should be, but as the stray exorcist dodged another strike from Issei, the omnipotent human came to realize that it didn't matter. Not in the middle of a fight, anyway. Fried's change in personality was a difference in this current timeline, Issei had quickly noted as he dodged a swift jab from Fried. It was strange when Issei thought deeply about it. Had he really noted many differences in other timelines? Sure, there were some things that would stay the same, but was it ever this different? It wasn't. It never was. In hindsight, Issei should have realized that he was the one that changed, nothing else, and because of his changes, every event would end in various ways. He was always the cause for everything that happened. He was the one that made things change. But now it was all different. From the Ars Goetia, to Rias' bratty attitude and now Fried. The changes weren't many, but they were still there and they puzzled him. But Issei had to dispel his thoughts. He needed to defeat Fried and then Kokebiel before he could think about such things. Issei caught Fried's fist as it flew towards him and grinned as he began to twist it. A growl coming from the stray exorcist. Oh, no you don't. Fried muttered as he reached for his pistol, his hand immediately on the grip as he drew it from its holster. Issei was forced to let go of Fried as he jumped to the side. A bullet, a real bullet, was fired from the barrel, the gunshot echoing throughout the hall. Issei ducked to the side, barely missing the second bullet, before he rushed forward, Fried placing his gun back into his holster with a click of his tongue. Fried's gun wasn't any ordinary weapon. Unbeknownst to Issei, it was capable of firing both normal bullets and light bullets with the flick of a switch. Fried was free to choose what kind of ammunition he could fire if he channeled a bit of his magic into a seal on the trigger. To make matters worse, it wasn't a revolver or a gun that required one to fan the hammer for rapid shots. It was a standard 9mm semi-automatic pistol which would allow one to fire all of the ammo of a clip in a matter of seconds. It was a convenient weapon for a stray exorcist that constantly dealt with the undead and other demonic beasts, as well as the occasional human. You're pretty good. Issei muttered as he ducked under a roundhouse kick that would have hit him in the head. Taking advantage of Fried's opening, Issei reached up to grab his leg. You are much better than I expected you to be. Fried muttered in response, a hidden grin forming on his face as he used the momentum from his earlier attack to form a dropkick that would surely connect with Issei's skull, even if the transition between movements was almost impossible for an ordinary person. As Fried's leg fell through the sky, the wind screeching around it as it flew through the air at superhuman speeds, Fried's confidence in his victory skyrocketing. However, as soon as his leg should have hit Issei, it connected with nothing but air, continuing its trajectory until it hit the floor, creating cracks in the stone. Fried rapidly glanced in every direction possible, trying to find Issei. But he couldn't find him. The omnipotent and seemingly insane human was gone as if he had never existed. There wasn't a single trace of his existence. There was nothing. What the? Fried muttered as he realized that the human was gone. A thought had occurred in his mind. Did that human even exist in the first place? Was his monstrous past finally making him insane? Was that human a physical representation of what he would become? Fried narrowed his eyes. He hadn't looked above him and that was the only place the human could have been, and if he wasn't there, Fried would declare himself to be mentally insane. It's not as if the human could be above him, anyway. It was certainly impossible. Fried, with a knot slowly forming in his stomach, tilted his head back. His eyes widened from shock. Hanging from the roof, no, standing upside down with the ceiling as the floor, was the human, his feet firmly planted against the stone. You finally found me, huh? Issei called out with a grin. Fried opened to his mouth to express his disbelief, but in that very moment, Issei's hand was pressed against his forehead. Fried was forced to the ground, his head smashing against the hard floor, a hiss coming from his mouth at the inconceivable pain, before Issei used the momentum of his fall to pivot his body into a roll, his feet firmly planted against the floor as he finished the smooth movement. He pulled his arm back, his hand still gripping Fried's skull, and threw the stray exorcist through a window with ease. Issei watched as his opponent's back connected with a thick tree, the exorcist falling onto his stomach soon after. He didn't move. Issei silently declared his victory as he straightened his back. He fell onto his knees and planted his hands against the floor as the strain of the fight was too much for his weak body. He quietly gasped for air and watched as his sweat dripped onto floor. Maybe that was overkill, he quietly muttered to himself. Issei didn't mention his insanity. It was the second time it had happened. It wasn't a comfortable topic to think about. Are you all right, Issei? Rias called out from the broken window. Although the stray exorcist had been dealt with in a timely manner, Issei's behavior wasn't reassuring in the slightest. Not after the conversation that the devil had clearly heard from outside the church. Issei glanced up at Rias and offered a shaky thumbs up. Yeah, I'm dealing with some inner turmoil at the moment, going a little insane. Rias furrowed her brow. Really? Issei chuckled in response to Rias' question. No, I'm not going insane. Issei pushed himself to his feet and offered a small smile that he hoped would convey that he was doing fine. His insanity was only temporary. There was no way he needed to be afraid. He wouldn't lose his mind and kill everyone in the vicinity. Everything would be fine. He hoped it would be fine, anyway. Fried, huh? Nothing more to say about that, I guess. Although, maybe Issei's descent into insanity this time wasn't very clear or well expressed. Oh well. Anyway, Kokebiel and his army are going down now. Anyway, this took longer than I expected because it's exam season at school and it's filling my time. Thanks for reading. See you next time. First, previous ch7 of 23 next. Chapter 8. The staircase was dark. It was too dark for Issei. He couldn't see a damn thing. The only sounds were the repetitive clanks of his footsteps and it was dusty. The omnipotent human wanted to get the job done, go home and peacefully sleep in his house that doesn't have a hole in the wall. Issei really needed to thank Rias for fixing the hole in his wall. So, where exactly does this take us? Kiba asked from at the back of the group, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Issei didn't turn to look back at Kiba as he spoke, his eyes focusing on the stairs he couldn't see through the darkness. We'll find out when we get there. Kiba didn't respond. There was nothing more to say, after all. If Issei didn't know where it was taking them, which he honestly didn't know where it was taking them, no one would. So there was no point in trying to force an answer out of someone who has no answer to a question. Are you sure Kokebiel's here, Issei? Akeno whispered to break the tension between the members of the small group. I'm almost certain he is. If Fried was waiting there, he must be guarding something. There was a short silence before Issei heavily sighed. I'm talking about the stray exorcist. Issei had to elaborate what he meant when he was talking about Fried as no one other than him knew who he was. The Gremory peerage didn't respond to Issei's elaboration. An uncomfortable silence fell upon the group for the smallest moment before Rias interrupted it with her own question. How did you know this staircase was hiding under the altar, anyway? Issei remained silent as he was not intending on answering the question. He couldn't really answer the question without seeming suspicious as he could only mention his omnipotence. He could lie and tell Rias that Fried had told him it was under the altar, but he was sure that the devil group had heard their earlier conversation. It was a hunch of sorts. Issei had finally responded. His answer seemed to satisfy the devil as she remained silent for the duration of their short journey down a dark staircase. Eventually, a soft light flickered against the walls as the group approached the bottom, Issei sighing in relief as he was able to see again. In front of them was a giant stone door that had many intricate symbols carved into it in a strangely artistic manner. This reminds me of a dungeon from a video game. Issei muttered to himself. He approached the door, a hand raised as he prepared himself to push the structure open, but as he touched the stone, something threw him backwards. Kaneko caught the omnipotent human in her arms and held onto him with an iron grip. Not safe? She asked, her eyes following the lines of symbols. Issei shook his head in response. No, it's not safe. I'll probably have to destroy the door with magic. Issei pried Kaniko's hands off of him and jumped out of her arms, landing on his own 2 feet with the flourish of an arm. Stand back, everybody. Issei let a few seconds pass to allow the Gremory group to back away from the door, his foot tapping against the floor in a steady rhythm. He glanced behind him, seeing that everyone was a safe distance away from the large door, and clicked his fingers. The door twisted and contorted as Issei's overwhelming magic surged through it, causing bulges to appear on the surface of the door. It pulsed once, twice and then exploded on the 3rd count, sending giant chunks of rock all throughout the hall and onto the staircase. A few of the larger chunks bounced past Issei, over the Gremory group and onto the staircase where they lodged themselves, blocking the way they came from. Issei deadpanned. Are you serious? This actually reminds me of some anime and video games. A wave of dust suddenly exploded into the air as the roof of the staircase caved in, effectively making sure the human and his devil friends couldn't escape in case of an emergency. Well, the only way is forward, then. Issei muttered to himself in disbelief. Issei stretched his arms out in front of him as he watched the rising dust cloud, waiting for an opportune moment to strike. Here I go, he whispered to himself as he quickly burst through the dust cloud and into the room that the door was protecting, skidding to a stop on a hard stone floor. Needless to say, the room was not what he expected and it was different from the last time he had seen it. Its ceiling was still high but was made of a gray polished stone. The walls were made of a similar material but had red banners covering most of it. The floor was made of a white stone that Issei thought was marble because of its pale glistening shine. A crowd of fallen angels and stray exorcists stood on the edges of the room as if they were anticipating Issei's arrival, a multitude of sneers and smirks tainting their already tainted faces. Kokebiel sat upon a lavish throne as if he was a king. Oh? You figured me out, human. Kokebiel bellowed from his seat on his throne, his loud, strong voice echoing around the room. The fallen angel jumped to his feet with crossed arms and stared down at Issei as if the human was nothing but trash, a smirk plastered on his face. Full of confidence, are we? Issei responded with a grin, using a single leg to support most of his weight as he too held folded arms against his chest. We'll see how quickly I can crush both your confidence and your pride. Kokebiel huffed in amusement as Rias and her peerage emerged from the settling dust cloud. Relying on some friends, are we? I thought we would have an honorable duel. Issei chuckled in response, his grin widening. Honorable duel? You don't know the definition of honor. Kokebiel rose an eyebrow. Is that so? Very well, then. Kokebiel clicked his fingers and watched as his loyal warriors swarmed Issei and his devil friends, many bullets and spears of light raining down on them. A red barrier that was made up of magic circles surrounded Rias' peerage as Issei dove into the swarms of stray exorcists, bodies flying as he slowly made his way to Kokebiel. Issei pulled his head back and gathered as much air as his lungs could handle before he released it with a roar, watching as waves of his enemies were pushed back by a cyclonic gust of wind. He hopped over their bodies and approached Kokebiel with his hands jammed into his pockets, his face marred by an annoyed frown. I didn't expect you to make it this far. Kokebiel had to raise an arm to block the wild punch that was sent his way, surprised from the speed that Issei had displayed. He was faster than their last encounter, that much was certain, but how did he had achieved this level of speed in such a small amount of time that left no room for training was unknown to Kokebiel. A few hours ago, Issei was struggling to beat him in hand-to-hand combat. Kokebiel was quick to note that Issei's fists were now traveling faster than his eyes could see. There was a reason for this, however, as Kokebiel was not utilizing his full power. When he takes form in the human world without Azazel's knowledge, he needs to suppress his power with a magical seal to avoid the attention of other supernatural beings. It was a minor inconvenience and an annoyance as the aftereffects of the seal left an uncomfortable feeling inside of the fallen angel's body. But as Kokebiel shattered the seal with a large burst of magic that sent Issei flying backwards into a throng of stray exorcists, the feeling had disappeared. Kokebiel was ready to end Issei's life. Kokebiel peered down at a fist that he had unintentionally clenched, feeling the power of his grip draw blood from his palms. Kokebiel glanced up at Issei as he rose from a pile of unmoving bodies, his hair shadowing his stoic eyes. Issei wasn't angry. No, he had no reason to be angry. It's not like he actually cared about Rainier or Rias and her peerage. He only felt pity and a slight regret from had occurred in the past, both in this timeline and his own unreadable past. Too many things had happened and he felt the need to lash out on someone, something that could handle his full power. He didn't even know why he was acting so out of character. Lately, whenever he is injured, he noted that he tends to form irrational thoughts and anger that fueled his desire to kill. And he had found that something that could be killed. Kokebiel, the angel of the stars, was standing in front of him. The fallen angel that most thought was one of the most powerful beings in existence was nothing but a tool that could be used to demonstrate Issei's true power. Issei had been holding back for far too long now. His pointless acts of seeming weak and powerless were over. He was ready to unleash everything he could. It wasn't that he was weak even when he was pretending to be weak. Issei could crush everyone as if they were mere ants under his shoe. There were no worthy challengers in the vicinity. Not even Kokebiel could be deemed to be worthy. His power was far too small when compared with an omnipotent being's limitless strength. And Issei was ready to give Kokebiel a taste of his true power. I had once known what it had felt like to be loved. That light sensation that grips your heart and fills you with a comforting warmth was the only thing that was keeping me alive. But I no longer care for my life as I have no one to love. I have no reason to live anymore because no one loves me. Nothing is tying me to this dastardly empty existence anymore, and I embrace my non-existent future, hoping that there is no such thing as life after death. The sweet embrace of an empty mind was what I craved. I just wanted to die, and I thought that Issei would have granted me my wish as he mercilessly tortured me. Issei, although he had inflicted the worst pain I could feel upon me, the short time I had spent with him was fun. He alleviated my mental pain, and I thought he was going to bestow me with the love that I had come to crave. It didn't have to be romantic or overly intimate. I wanted to feel as if I was worth something because I have no value and am ultimately useless. Not even a powerless human would want me. So, as I sit here in the darkness, holding my knees to my chest as my dead eyes stare at the dirt floor, I can't help but wonder why. I can't help but wonder why I won't kill myself. Why? I've told myself countless times that I'm better off being dead. No one cares for me anymore and I have no real friends. No one would miss me if I suddenly died. Not even the man that I had once loved. But Issei had offered me life when I was giving him death. Would I not be branded as a fool if I was not accepting of his offer? This human had offered me a reason to live again, after all. He had made me human, the thing I had once protected. So I am no longer a fallen angel and I now have a chance to start a new life, a life that will lead me to the love that I crave. Knowing this, shouldn't I despise death and embrace the future? Alas, nothing changed within me as I came to know that shocking truth. My empty heart remained empty. My silent mind remained silent and my motionless body remained motionless. Unmoving, unfeeling and unthinking. I wanted to end my suffering already, but I didn't have the means to do so. My magic has been sealed away. I'm too weak and afraid to end myself with my own hands and there's nothing around me. I sat in an empty darkness, sitting on the dirty ground, wishing that I would die. I want to die. I want to die. I want to die. Issei wiped a sliver of blood that had escaped the corner of his mouth. He stared down at it for a split second as he regained his breath, finding that he was reaching his limit. Kokebiel wasn't faring much better in the face of his enemy. Several bones had been fractured or broken in the short but fierce fight and a few organs had been punctured. But Kokebiel didn't pay attention to his physical condition or pain. As long as he was able to defeat Issei, he was fine with his death. He had lived too long and had seen too much pain and corruption to the point that it had slowly driven him insane, forcing him out of heaven and into the underworld where his old companion Azazel had welcomed him with open arms. If only he could return to the days where life was truly peaceful. How he craved the touch of his deceased friends and family. All he wanted was his memories of the past to become real once more. His first lover, his first friend, his first kill. He wanted to return to the time when everything was simpler. However, he knew that that was impossible. Turning back time was not something that could be accomplished by any known being in the universe, so Kokebiel had to deal with his grief and suffering as he warded off Issei, watching as his loyal warriors were mercilessly destroyed by a small peerage of weak devils. So, as he stood in the middle of the stone hall, facing the strongest enemy he has ever gone up against, he grinned. He grinned because he was going to kill his opponent and claim the title of a victor, even if it meant he had to die in the process. He didn't care about his life anymore. He didn't care about anyone or anything anymore. All he wanted was to win. Faster than most eyes could see, Issei and Kokebiel threw themselves at their opponent at the same time. Countless amounts of punches, kicks and magic attacks were thrown around as if they were nothing, the mere wind pressure from their final confrontation threatening to blast the both of them away. Both warriors steeled themselves and held their ground, slowly becoming weaker, slowly losing their power and slowly losing their lives. Issei endured a blow to the solar plexus, blood shooting from his mouth in a crimson spray. Kokebiel clenched his teeth as he suffered a kick to the neck, his head snapping to the side as blood seeped through the gaps in his teeth. They were at a stalemate. They would both die before one killed the other. There was no competition anymore. If they did not put all of their strength into a final attack, they would die together in a pitiful hellhole that no one knew about. Kokebiel, Issei screamed as he pulled his fist back, a dark blue flame engulfing his fist in an extravagant flicker of light. Issei. Kokebiel responded with his own scream, his hand outstretched as he gathered all of his magical power into his final attack. Issei burst forward in an incredible display of speed and threw his fist into an uppercut, his face inches away from a large magical circle that would definitely blow his head off. Issei's fist continued its trajectory upwards but, just as it was about to connect with Kokebiel's chin, missed as the fallen angel tilted his head back. A grin of pure malice spread across Kokebiel's face. "You fucked up, Issei. You absolutely fucked up." A giant cloud of gray smoke filled the room as an explosion of epic proportions came forth from Kokebiel's magical circle, effectively ending Issei's life. Ha! What a waste of talent. Kokebiel spat a glob of blood on the floor as he struggled to stand upright, his legs slowly losing their strength to the point that Kokebiel was forced to collapse on the spot. Off in the distance, amid the sounds of an ongoing battle, a distant shout was heard. Kokebiel turned his to the side, finding a silhouette standing in the smoke as he smiled, realizing that his time was up. He didn't know if he had actually killed Issei and he couldn't care less. He was dying and was going to meet his friends in whatever afterlife there was. But, just as Kokebiel was about to release his attack, Kokebiel had felt something in the atmosphere shift. It wasn't the mood of the fight. The actual air in the surrounding had changed in some way and it had allowed Issei to survive the blast. So I've been outsmarted, huh? The smoke was blown away by a gentle wind. Issei hovered in the air, his hands in his pocket as he stared down at Kokebiel. The human didn't move. He didn't make an effort to say anything. He stared down at Kokebiel, watching as the fallen angel struggled to move his arm. Kokebiel didn't kill Issei. His attack wasn't even close to hitting the human. "You should just end me already." Kokebiel's sight was growing dimmer by the second. "Is that your final wish, Kokebiel?" "Yes." The conviction in Kokebiel's voice was too strong. He had accepted his fate and nothing would change his mind. Kokebiel wanted to die at the end of a glorious battle to prove to himself that his life was worth living, even if it would end shortly after. He didn't mind if he had survived the fight, either. Kokebiel would have committed an honorable suicide next to the corpse of his opponent if it came down to that. Then so be it. Issei pointed an outstretched hand in Kokebiel's direction, a small magical circle appearing. "Your life and everything it stood for will soon disappear." Kokebiel watched as the silhouette dispersed, a small smile forming on his face. He would meet his lover in the afterlife and that was all he could have asked for. An explosion rocked the area as Kokebiel's body was devoured by an inferno. "Hi. It's been a while. I have no real reasons. I'm lazy, irresponsible and dealing with some inner turmoil. Although, because of that inner turmoil, I feel as if the quality of this chapter is greater than anything I have ever produced. People who have followed me for a while, what do you say about that? By the way, did you like the chapter? I knew it took a long time, but it's better than nothing, right? Anyway, I'll see you in the next chapter, whenever it comes out. Thank you for your continued support." First, previous ch 8 of 23 next, chapter 9. "I've see you've not only fallen from heaven, Rainier." Issei called out as he peered into a cage that had been concealed by a rather strong dose of illusion magic. The cage in question was small, It was large enough to fit a person of average stature if they were sitting cross-legged with a straight back, but was not large enough for a person to lay on their back with an outstretched body or if they were standing. The metallic bars of the cage were thicker than Issei's forearm and shone brightly in the artificial light of the large room. Magic sealing seals placed all over the hard metal. It was designed to be hard to break into. Rainier glanced up at Issei and stared at him, her head buried in between the two knees that she held to her chest. Pain. Pain and regret were the two emotions that were present in her dead eyes. Her violet orbs were dull and lifeless and lacked the warmth that Issei had seen earlier on in the day. Issei shoved a tightly clenched hand into a pocket and grimaced. "What's that supposed to mean?" The fallen angel quietly asked, her voice as equally empty and dull as her voice was. Issei felt conflicted as he stared down at the supernatural being. What he was doing here, offering Rainier his silent pity, he did not know. He had been asked by Rias to assist her in defeating Kokebiel and that was all. Issei didn't even care about Rainier in the slightest, nor did he care about Rias and her peerage. In fact, Issei did not know why he had helped Rias. Sure, Issei would have an increased reputation with the devils of this town and the Grigori if Azazel was accepting of what had happened, but the whole matter was dull and uninteresting to him. There was no immediate gain or benefit from defeating Kokebiel. Issei scratched his cheek in confusion as his mind needed a second to process his thoughts. "I don't know what I was trying to say, either. Anyway, it's about time I set you free." Issei poked the cage and watched as the bars instantly shattered, the magical seals offering very little resistance in the way of an omnipotent being's power. "Just leave me here." Issei watched as Rainire's head lolled around on the base of her neck as her quiet voice escaped her lips. Dejected, alone and afraid. Three key features that were somewhat identifiable through the fallen angel's actions. "Why?" Issei asked as he crouched down to meet Rainire's lifeless eyes with his own. "Because I'm worthless." Issei snorted at Rainire's sudden remark and grabbed her cool wrist with his hand. Issei's eyes scanned the entirety of her milky arm as he gently traced his index finger down the appendage, noting the smooth texture and comfortable cold it offered. Issei's eyes met Rainire's once more as he clasped both of his hands over her own. "Useless? Why do you believe that?" Issei's voice was barely a whisper. Rainier responded in an instant, "Because I have no value." Two hands fell to Issei's side as he silently pushed himself to his feet, his eyes never leaving Rainire's. "I don't think, feel or exist on my own terms." Knees were pulled tighter to a chest as a head rested in between them. "My whole life, I've never done anything by myself. I've always been controlled by someone or something." Rainier lifted her head as tears flowed down her cheeks, her raw emotions a mere contrast to her dead eyes and empty expression. "I've never known what it's like to be free." Issei quietly released a shaky breath of stale air he hadn't realized he was holding, a nausea-inducing knot forming in his stomach. Twisting and turning, wrenching at his insides as he unconsciously fell back one step with his arms wrapped around his abdomen. Despite his omnipotence and range of experiences, Issei couldn't hold back the shiver that chilled him to his core as he fell to his knees, his eyes wide. He hadn't expected this when he arrived in this universe. He hadn't expected his sudden insanity. He hadn't expected his sudden urge to torture someone in his insanity. He hadn't expected the pity he felt for Rainier. He didn't expect his conflict with Kokebiel. He hadn't expected this. The emotionally broken fallen angel that couldn't help herself in her greatest time of need. The way the fallen angel stared up at him with her dead eyes and empty expression. The way the fallen angel wanted to end her life. A cold sweat ran down Issei's back as he began to crawl towards Rainier. Although he had wanted to change the future, he did not consider the consequences he would face when making such a foolish decision. He should have let this universe run its course without interfering as he usually does. But now that he has achieved a part of what he desires, he is facing the results of his actions, the one thing that he did not think of when selfishly thinking of himself. "Rainier, I'm sorry," Issei muttered as he held a hand out in the air, his fingertips lightly brushing against Rainire's cheek as she flinched under his gentle touch. "This is all my fault." A small smile slipped onto the fallen angel's face as Issei slowly wrapped his arms around her, holding her head against his chest. "What are you sorry for? You've done nothing wrong." "I'm sorry for everything." I'm sorry for ruining your life, for being here, for killing Kokebile, for existing, Issei grimaced as he felt something form in his heart, his words struggling to leave his mouth. It was the first time he had felt such a thing in a long time. It wasn't happiness, anger, nor was it love. It was pure sadness. Despite his one regret and lack of emotional familiarity with his companions, he felt a cold feeling in his chest that could only be described as sadness. Rainier wrapped her arms around Issei's torso as her cheeks became stained with her tears. I should be the one thanking you, she whispered as she closed her eyes, the beating of Issei's heart resonating in her mind as she silently smiled. Issei gulped as he stared at two gloriously giant mounds that comfortably sat opposite him. Oh, what the hell am I doing? He muttered to himself as he rolled over, resisting his masculine urges in favor of retaining what little dignity he thought he had. The naked body of what could be considered a beautiful girl was hard to resist, after all, so holding back his perverse thoughts and actions consumed all of his willpower. Not too much time had passed before he had rolled over once more, staring at Rainier's two mounds without a shred of dignity remaining. I have now stooped to the level of my perverted counterparts and there is nothing wrong with it, not yet, at least. Issei repeated those words in his mind as he slowly breathed, owlishly staring at the twin peaks of the two mounds without any regrets. Even if I'm caught doing this, I have no regrets. Issei was broken out of his stupor by the quiet vibrations of his phone on his desk, an almost silent alarm crying out in an attempt to disturb the sleep of anyone who was near it. Unfortunately, Issei was quick to turn it off as he jumped out of bed, switching the alarm off with the singular swipe of a finger, effectively ruining the mood of the non-sentient object. It wasn't as if the alarm would have woken Issei up on any other day. No, he'd continue to sleep, oblivious as to what's happening in the world around him as he buried himself in blankets and pillows that almost suffocate him. But it wasn't himself that Issei was worried about, it was Rainier. A couple of days had passed since the Kokebile incident. Diplomatic meetings between devils and fallen angels regularly take place at Kuo Academy to sort out the specifics of the incident and how it had come to be, Kokebile's planned insurgents being the main topic of discussion. Luckily for Issei, no one had broken through his window in the middle of the night and had killed him in his sleep. The same could be said for Rainier, however. She was more concerned about encountering an old companion or associate that would try to take her away from Issei and the new life she was building. Rainier's new life involved lazing around all day doing nothing, cuddling Issei whenever she had the chance to and sleeping with a teenage boy naked. Absolutely butt naked. No underwear, no shyness, no messing around. Rainier shamelessly slept with a teenage boy that she hadn't known for more than a week absolutely naked. Rainier didn't have a problem with it. None at all. Issei did at first, but those idiotic feelings slowly dispersed as his hidden Hyodo perversion surfaced after a millennia of rest. How could he not be fine with it? He'd be stupidly weird if he did have a problem with it in the end. Not that he cared about what others thought of him. If he wanted to be stupidly weird, he'd be stupidly weird. If he didn't want to suffocate in two glorious mounds of soft flesh during his sleep, he didn't want to suffocate. For some strange reason, Issei couldn't shake off the feeling that no one would understand his dilemma if he told them about it. Fortunately for Issei, his parents didn't understand his dilemma because they didn't know about it in the first place. While his mother and father knew that Rainier, known to them as Yuma Amano, was living with them due to some heavy magical influence and a cover-up story, they had no idea what the fallen angel and Issei did at night. For all they cared, they could be engaging in sexual intercourse and there would be nothing wrong with it. As long as his parents received their deserved sleep, they were fine with whatever the two did. However, they did insist that Rainier at least go to school if she was going to do nothing all day. And that's what Issei was going to achieve today. For the first time in a few days, Issei Hyodo was going to Kuo Academy to persuade Sona Citri, the student council president and heir of the Citri Devil clan, to allow Rainier to join the school. If the encounter annoyed the hell out of Issei, so be it. This was all for the sake of his own sanity. Indeed, Issei's sanity was slowly degrading as Rainier clung to him as if he was a life support machine. While Rainier did need some emotional support, she didn't need to drape her arms around Issei at every given chance because she felt insecure and unsafe without his touch. By attending school, Issei was hoping that Rainier would be able to rebuild her confidence in life so she was not as dependent. It was all for Rainier's sake. Issei quickly reminded himself that he didn't actually care about Rainier. Not yet, at least. The duty of looking after her was shoved onto him by that insufferable red-haired devil, anyway, so he'll be damned if he started to care about the fallen angel. The less he saw her, the less attached he'll become, not that he'd become attached to her in the first place. But, if Issei was truly honest with himself, he knew that his main reasoning for sending Rainier to school was because he didn't want her to discover his secret stash of secret stuff that mainly consisted of various materials that had been designed for an extracurricular activity, even though he knew that the chances of it already being discovered were high. He was only a male, supposedly teenage, human, after all, and if the greatest pleasure of a human male was abruptly taken away from him, he'd definitely start a killing spree. Issei, kid, I need to see you after class. Issei rose an eyebrow, staring up at his chemistry teacher in disinterest. What is it about? You. Issei sighed and slumped over his desk, his hands draping over the edge as his cheek lay on a comfortably cool textbook. It was unusual for Issei to stay back after class. In fact, the only time he had stayed after class was when he was trying to avoid his first contact with Rainier. Unfortunately, that attempt to avoid the fallen angel proved to be a waste of time as his teacher had places to be. So, with his teacher's request in mind, Issei tuned out the remaining segments of his class and the dismissal of his classmates. The lingering groups were ushered out of the room by the teacher. The door was quietly shut and, as the chemistry teacher took her place on the edge of the desk that was in front of Issei's, she crossed her arms under her bust. So, what's been happening, kid? Issei glanced up at his teacher and huffed, lifting his head off of his textbook. Nothing, actually. So you've been away from school for the past few days just because? Issei nodded once and glanced at the nearby window, noting the blue sky. It wasn't as if he had wanted to stay home, although, he didn't mind that he had. And it was all because he was forced to take care of Rainier because she had been broken in various different ways, wasting some precious time that could have been spent on entertaining himself. Oh. How Issei now regretted getting involved with the fallen angel. His having to take care of her as if she was a mentally challenged child made him rethink his decision to spare her. Yup. Issei simply replied as he placed his head back on his textbook, ignoring his teacher's face palm. I know you don't like homework and all of that stuff, but you need to come to school every day to be well educated. Some of the other teachers have a problem with you, mainly the art teacher, but you're a good kid. You just need to put your brain to use. Issei groaned as his chemistry teacher of all people gave him that lecture. Sure, he'll admit that he's often lazy and irresponsible, but he knew that he could pass whatever exam or assignment he was given. Not that anyone knew that, of course. Most of his teachers thought he was a lost cause because he never handed work in on time. No amount of requested interviews did anything because his parents were always working. Issei was, in their eyes, a waste of time. I know. I've received that lecture before. You don't have to tell me twice. Issei's chemistry teacher grinned and crossed one leg over the other, continuing to stare down at her student. Anyway, what do you think of those creeps that have been wandering around the school? I've been told that they're international businessmen that are interested in making investments in this hellhole. Issei raised his head once more. Wait, seriously? You've been told they're businessmen? The teacher nodded once in response, waiting for Issei to rant on about the subject matter as he sighed. Miss, no offense to you, but they look nothing like businessmen. Sure, they wear suits, but the majority of them are tall, overly muscular and exude some kind of pressure from their bodies. You'd have to be really stupid to believe the person who told you that. So, you're saying they're supernatural beings. Also, don't call me, miss, when we're alone. You make me feel like an old woman. Just call me. The door slid open as two men entered the classroom. One had long, crimson hair that reached down to his shoulders and back with blue-green eyes. He was tall but slim and wore a black suit with a red tie. He stepped ahead of the second man whose hair was short and spiky, colored black with blonde bangs. He too wore a black suit that was accentuated with a black tie. Issei rose an eyebrow. Oh, it's you too. The crimson-haired man's eyes sharpened as he grimaced. Issei Hyodo, you are under arrest for the murder of Kokebiel and Razor Phoenix. Issei's teacher stared at the two men dumbfounded before she glanced down at her student's passive expression. No emotions, other than a small grin that revealed that he had expected the two men to find him. Issei, you murdered someone. Issei stared up at his teacher. Correction. I may have murdered one of them. For the amount of time it took me to release this, the amount of words in this chapter isn't quite worth it, is it? Anyway, what do you think? I know my quality control of my writing is weird. In the previous chapter, my writing was sublime. Now I don't know what it is. Going back and editing it, I feel as if it seems rushed. I don't know how to explain it. Should I make Issei's chemistry teacher a real character with a name, appearance and personality instead of being the chemistry teacher? Let me know, 'cause I don't know what to do with her. Thanks for reading and sticking around. Your patience is appreciated. Yes, I know Issei sounds like a freaking tsundere, but that's character development for you. Also, the real story starts now. First, previous ch 9 of 23 next, chapter 10. Why did we go this far to save a powerless fallen, Issei? A single, wishful dream. A small act of kindness goes a long way, Rias. Besides, didn't you ask me to defeat Kokebile for you? Staring up at his face and into his brown eyes, noticing his small smile. While it is true that I had asked you that, your true intention was to save this fallen angel, wasn't it? The way he'd occasionally glance down at her to make sure she was all right, to make sure she was comfortably unconscious in his arms. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't actually care for her. This is an added bonus. I simply want to ensure my own safety in this town. Selfish words that brought pain to her heart, destroying the gentle and courageous image he had built for himself. That's different from what I'd expected you to say. It's extremely selfish, as well. How he grimaced in pain at what he had openly said, not meaning to reveal his true feelings to others. How he cast his eyes down to the floor in regret, his face slowly fading away into the present darkness. Rainier opened her eyes to greet the blinding light of the sun, lying still in an attempt to pull the fading dream to the forefront of her mind, trying to remember its contents in a desperate attempt to recall why it was seemingly important to her. Was it about him, her human lifeline? The teenage boy that came to her rescue despite the overwhelming odds? Rainier couldn't remember it in the end, no matter how hard she had tried to save the fleeting thought in her mind, and rose an arm to block the sun from her eyes. She groaned and rolled over moments later, expecting her human lifeline to grumble in annoyance with the sudden gain of pressure on his body. The cool, empty space of the bed welcomed Rainier instead, prompting her to crack an eyelid open in an attempt to find him, the one that she knew she had dreamed about. Issei, Rainier muttered, her voice dry and coarse from dehydration. Where are you? The fallen angel dropped her legs off of the side of the bed, her feet touching the carpeted floor, as she sat up, rubbing her eyes as she did so. She stared at the wall above Issei's desk as she gathered her thoughts, wondering where Issei was, and sighed, slowly pushing herself to her feet. Rainier wrapped a blanket around her body to protect her modesty, despite the fact that no one was home with her, and stepped towards the desk, a single post-it note stuck to the wood. I've gone to school today to negotiate your enrollment with Sona Citri. I won't take too long and should be back at 4. Winky face. Rainier sighed as she scrunched the paper into a ball that she tossed at a small, empty trash can, clicking her tongue as she missed her target. She glanced at a nearby digital clock. Midday, huh? What the hell am I going to do until Issei comes home? Sirzex Lucifer of the Gremory bloodline and Azazel of the Grigori, two of the most powerful beings in existence, came to personally retrieve me. Huh? Are you that scared of me? Issei inspected his fingernails as he unconsciously mocked the devil and fallen angel, a frown forming on the human's face as he noticed the large gap between the edge of his nail and the end of his finger. You're capable of murdering a powerful member of the Phoenix clan with one attack as well as the murder of the second strongest fallen angel. That's more than enough to warrant our appearance. Issei glanced up at the stoic expressions the two beings wore and sighed. Okay, then. You guys clearly seem to be taking this seriously, so I won't joke around. What do you make of this, miss? Issei stared up at his teacher with an empty expression and waited for her to respond, his head supported by one of his hands. Instead of giving Issei the reply he wanted, his teacher glared at the two men and waved her hand at them as if she was trying to make them leave the room. Before we start, are you guys permitted to visit the school right now? I didn't receive a notice from the headmaster. Sirzex pulled a laminated pass out of a pocket and held it out in front of Issei's teacher, her head nodding once in satisfaction. She stared at Azazel, watching as the fallen angel grumbled a few words to himself as he too pulled out a pass that was similar to that of his devil companion. Satisfied? Azazel asked as he glowered. Issei's teacher nodded once more with a wide smile, pushed herself off of the desk she was leaning on and faced the two men, a hand on a hip. Now, can you leave my student alone? Even though you're businessmen who have been permitted to wander around the school, I don't want you to interact with this idiot over here while acting as if you have chunibyo. It'll be a bad influence on him. Issei smirked as Azazel scrunched his face up in distaste, his eyes quickly forming a glare that could bore holes through people if it was deemed possible. Sirzex merely chuckled in response with a grin. Could you please give us a moment with Issei Hyodo? We need to discuss some things with him. Issei's teacher rose an eyebrow. No, I will not give you a moment to discuss some things with Issei because he did not murder anyone. Seriously, are you guys Chunis or something? Sirzek's lips twitched as his grin faltered, his expression appearing to be forced and unnatural as he tried to hide his annoyance. Issei didn't even need to correct his teacher. In his mind, he didn't murder anyone, especially Razor Phoenix, as he was ensuring the safety of his own life and town. What will it take to make you leave the room? Azazel asked with a grumble as he observed the room, his eyes never sitting on an object for more than a second. Unfortunately, there is nothing that you can do. Azazel frowned as his brown eyes met the teacher's honey brown. Are you sure about that? In an instant, a small, spear-like object had pierced the wall behind the teacher's head, the milky skin of her cheek splitting open as a fine line of blood formed in less than a second. With wide eyes, lips tightly pressed together in a thin line, she turned her head to look at the wall behind her. There was nothing. No hole in the wall, even though the object audibly hit it, no marks, nothing. Absolutely nothing that would have indicated that she had been attacked, even though she had been physically harmed. She raised a hand to the cut on her cheek and pressed her fingers against the wound, lowering her hand so she could observe the blood. Her eyes widened. She quickly lifted her head and stared at the two men with confusion plastered all over her face. What just happened? Azazel crossed his arms as Sirzex shot the fallen angel a disapproving glare. Will you leave now? No, Azazel sighed and ran a hand through his hair, trying to think of a method that would remove the teacher from the room without using force. A smug grin formed on his face as he shifted his body weight onto a single leg. What's your name? Chiharu Yamada. How old are you? I am 22 years old. Azazel whistled in surprise as he shoved his hands into his pockets. That's unusual. You don't really see fully fledged teachers at your age. Chiharu blushed as she rubbed the back of her neck in embarrassment, a quiet chuckle escaping her as she held a hand on her cheek. Well, I graduated school earlier than others. Issei rose an eyebrow as he attentively listened to the conversation. He hadn't realized that his teacher was quite young. In fact, he thought that she had to be in her mid to late 20s, not the beginning of them. Sirzex had the same train of thought as he quietly stood next to an Azazel that was offering Chiharu his praise. Oh. Do we have a genius here? Azazel smirked as Chiharu's blush deepened. Hardly, I just studied a lot. Azazel approached Chiharu and offered her a handkerchief that he pulled from one of his pockets. Stop being modest. You must have been a genius to become a teacher at such a young age. Chiharu gracefully took the handkerchief as a gesture of kindness and pressed it against her cheek, her blood indistinguishable when compared to her flushed cheeks. Well, if you say so, hee. Issei held back a snort that would have otherwise spoiled the mood and forced himself to his feet, his hand reaching for a bag that sat next to his desk. Bribing Chiharu with compliments won't work, Azazel. Believe me when I say that I've tried and still continue to try, especially when it comes to not handing in my homework. Issei slung his bag around his shoulder and stretched his arms out in front of him. A red magical circle had appeared in front of a hand that Sirzex calmly held in front of him. Azazel ignored Issei and Sirzex as he clicked his tongue in disappointment, his head turned to the side. Unfortunately, Issei, I am not permitted to let you leave by yourself. Issei yawned as he began to approach the door, seemingly ignoring Sirzek's creased brow and grim frown, his hands shoved into his pockets. What are you going to do about it? Issei held a single eye open as he stopped at the doorway, offering the devil a smug grin from over his shoulder. You leave me no choice. A thick, gray cloud smoke burst into the corridor as an orb of pure malice was shot towards Issei at a subsonic speed that threatened to break the sound barrier, the human hastily creating a magical shield shortly before impact. The smoke slowly cleared as students and teachers alike filled the corridor as Chiharu stared at Sirzek's back with her mouth agape in a mixture of shock and awe. Azazel cleared his throat and watched as Sirzek dropped his hand back to his side. Now, shall we leave, Azazel? Sirzek began to turn around, believing that he had murdered Issei as if he was an ant. However, Sirzek discovered Issei sitting at his desk as if nothing had happened. You survived that attack? Sirzek's words were barely audible over the hubbub of the crowd that slowly filled the corridor. You look like you've seen a ghost, Sirzek. Even though heaven and hell exist, do you believe in the supernatural? Chiharu slowly turned her head and rapidly glanced at the dying smoke cloud and an Issei that happily held a shit-eating grin on his face. What the hell is happening here? Chiharu cried out as her awe and shock slowly devolved into confusion. From Issei's perspective, as well as Azazel's and Sirzek's, Chiharu's confusion made sense to them. A few moments ago, she was a normal chemistry teacher that knew nothing about magic or the supernatural. She had been raised on science and the belief that religion was a lie. But when she was confronted by two men who claimed to be highly influential religious figures, she couldn't help but think that they suffered from a severe case of chunibyo. However, when confronted with an awe-inducing display of what could only be described as magic, she couldn't help but feel confused. She was raised on science, after all, so what was she supposed to believe? In Chiharu's mind, these two men couldn't have possibly been Azazel the scapegoat and Lucifer because there was no way that they could exist. I'll reintroduce myself, Azazel said as he stepped forward, a hand outstretched in front of Chiharu. I am Azazel the scapegoat, leader of the Grigori. This idiotic devil next to me is Sirzek's Lucifer, a devil that currently holds the title of the strongest Satan, Lucifer. Chiharu slowly grabbed Azazel's hand and stared up at the fallen angel with a blank expression. You're not kidding, are you? Bonus. I sat in the center of the front row, staring up at the red velvet curtains. They were slowly pulled apart by some unknown force, revealing a dark abyss that contained nothing. Lights flickered on, lighting up the expansive stage that contained nothing but a single person. Wait. Where the hell am I? I chuckled to myself as the person looked around, a hand scratching their head as they fell further into confusion. This is a stage? Their eyes briefly meet with my own and the person frowned. Who are you and what do you want with me? I crossed one leg over the other as I sunk into the back of my extremely comfortable seat, a sigh of pleasure escaping my lips. The person on the stage, they did well to notice me. Normally, the people I control aren't able to see past the invisible barrier I create when I control them. Indeed, this actor, Issei Hyodo, has managed to break the fourth wall. It was something I should have expected, though, as I have created him to be an omnipotent being that sees all. I clapped my hands in approval as Issei lazily shoved a hand into the pocket of his pants. Me? Well, you should know who I am, Issei gasped as he fell back a step, a look of pure terror quickly appearing on his face. He raised a shaky finger that was pointed at me and grimaced. Why you? Are you the flying spaghetti monster? I pursed my lips as I furrowed my brow. Are you serious? That's, like, a dead joke or whatever the hell it is. You're a couple of years late, buddy. Issei returned to his original posture and cleared his throat. I know. I was playing along, though. It was the first thing that came to mind. He stuck his tongue out of his mouth as if he was trying to mock me. I grinned and snapped my fingers, a sheet of paper forming in front of him. Anyway, here's the script for the preview. If you please read it, my slave. Issei glanced down at the title and rose an eyebrow in disinterest. Really? This is called, The Ultimate Preview. I nodded my head once and raised a fist at him. You got a problem with it, punk. I'll kill you. Issei sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Fine. I'm only doing this because you can discontinue my story. Issei shouted as he quickly scanned the sheet of paper, scrunching it up into a ball after a few moments. He tossed it behind him as he frowned. You're super slow at updating as well, you lazy bastard. So I feel as if you're gonna discontinue it without any warnings. I feigned ignorance and pretend that I didn't hear the last part, even though that it was a whisper that echoed throughout the empty hall. What? It's not like I'm going to abandon a story in the middle of it. Oh, wait. Anyway, just read it already. Hurry up. I demanded as I slammed a fist on the armrest, flinching as pain shot through my arm like lightning. No, I refuse to read it. Issei crossed his arms and turned his nose up at the thought of reading the preview I had worked so hard on creating. Just read it, damn it. No, I'll do it myself and replace you if you don't do it. And you know what happens when I replace you, right? You'll disappear, forever. Issei flinched and awkwardly chuckled by himself as his face paled. That's right. I taught this insolent fool a lesson that he'd never forget for the rest of his life. Issei cleared his throat. Next time on World's End, the author, my dastardly dastard creator Freckhat, has prepared this, in the next chapter. Stoop. Cut. That was terrible. Also, you're spoiling the next chapter and I haven't even decided on what I'm gonna put in it. Issei growled at me and stomped his foot against the floor, creating a hole in the stage. You know what, I'm done. I'm never reading the preview again. I snapped my fingers and, with a puff of smoke, he disappeared in the most anticlimactic way possible, and he disappeared forever, forever. Now I'm alone again. I sigh and slump down in my chair. I'm all alone again, because I didn't describe Chiharu properly. I'll list her basic information. Name: Chiharu Yamada. Age: 22. Height: 173 centimeters. BWH. It's a secret. Shoot UUUUUP. Clothes, as of this chapter's, a pinstripe suit that looks as if it's been designed for men. Appearance: milky, smooth skin, short brown hair that ends just above her shoulders while barely hanging above her eyebrows, honey brown eyes and, that's it, pretty ordinary. Think of Kagurazaka Ayame from Eromanga Sensei. I know, I'm lazy and fairly useless. I kinda want to update faster, but I usually get stuck on what I should write for certain parts of a chapter. Just like with the whole Searsex, Azazel, Issei and Chiharu thing. I had no idea how to write a sequence that seemed as if it made sense character-wise and whatnot. That's also why parts of this chapter may read a little awkwardly. I got confused with wording and grammar and punctuation and, I'll leave it at that. Also, the preview was a fun little thing I wrote in a couple of minutes. Also, Chiharu has entered the story due to popular demand. She's no longer the chemistry teacher, she's Chiharu Yamada and you better remember that. Thanks for reading World's End, everyone. I know it's kinda hard to stay interested in the story when I don't update as frequently as I used to, but I'm trying my best, damn it. First, previous ch10 of 23 next.